Thank you very much indeed, Conference, and we are now back into public session and an opportunity for me at this particular point to say thank you very much to those members of the press and other organisations who've been joining us throughout the public sessions and giving us some very straightforward, good, honest coverage. So thank you very much indeed for that. I'm trusting that all delegates are back into the conference hall. You will realise that we've lost a little bit of time for that technical change. I will make sure that the total amount of debating time allocated to each section is preserved, and I will be doing that by shortening the amount of time allocated to the Joint General Secretary's speech, so that we make sure that we are working within the time limits as indicated in the conference committee report. We're going to move to motion 32. Motion 32 has no amendments. It's the second of the sector motions, this one from the post-16 sector. We've got Duncan Blackie, who's going to be proposing. Jean Evanson is going to be seconding that. And conference, we have a number of speakers who wish to speak in support, but no speakers against. Just to let you know, the first of the speakers for would be Rob Behan from NEU. Good morning, Duncan. Good to see you on screen again. You have your 4 minutes, or up to 4 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you. Very confusing this morning, in and out of virtual environments. Difficult to know if we're real or imaginary. I think we'll settle for being complex. The thrust of this motion really takes up where we were 2 years ago when we were meeting the last time for real in Liverpool. We talked about the start of a campaign to get proper pay for sixth form teachers at that point, and we only just past the end of that. So I want to reflect on that a little bit because in the time that we haven't had a proper conference, we have had a big battle in the sixth form sector, which has been very important, and I want to draw out a few lessons from it. Obviously, people will be aware that we had 6 days of strike action that was due to be more, but was caught short by the COVID crisis. And as a result of that fighting, the 2 years worth of fighting, we ended up with getting pay parity with school teachers. But there's a few lessons from that I think we need to reflect on, because it's quite often referred to in the union now. And I think there's a few lessons that are important. The first one is that we were able to do it in the sixth form colleges because we've been organising and fighting for many, many years in many colleges to build the base in order to be able to do that. So that was important. The second is that we have an active network of reps that build from below. We talk to each other, we exchange tips and techniques and so on, and that's very important as well. And thirdly, we had, in the course of the action, let's put it this way, let's say between us from a rank and file level and the union leadership, we had a situation of creative tension that allowed the strikes to go on, to get more strikes as time went on in order to do that. And I say that in the most constructive way. I don't mean it in a negative way at all, but we had to prove ourselves from below that we were ready to fight several times over, actually, and convince the executive and other parts of the leadership that we were worthy of support, and they did support us in that. I'm very grateful for that. Having got to where we are now, though, I think there's a few points that we need to be aware of. Firstly, is that the funding crisis never goes away. It's always there. But I think it's important in our context to remember that we want more funds to come into the sector, but we also have to be aware, and this is important for all of us in the time of fat-capped mat chiefs, that there is funding in the sector. So this year, for example, there's something like 7% more money in the pot that the bosses didn't want us to get hold of. Next year, in colleges, there's a peculiarity that we have very, very high student numbers, again, as an inadvertent result of the COVID crisis, and therefore there's going to be money there for us to fight over as well. And the final thing I would say is that obviously our attention is going to be on funding in FE colleges and in the sixth form sector. That's the fight for that, for continuing clawing back the money we've lost during austerity is going to be important for all of us. On Monday, we all voted for motion 10. Motion 10 says that we fight for a 7% pay increase for all school teachers. It didn't get a lot of attention on Monday because of the speed at which we work, but it's there, and that's very important. And we will be doing likewise in the sixth form colleges and FE colleges and so on going forward, because the next battle, we've fought austerity, we've had to fight COVID, and now we're back to fighting austerity again. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Duncan. Coming to the end as your 4 minutes elapsed, and we're calling Jean next, Jean Evanson.
Good to see you, President. Good to see you, conference. I too want to talk about the battle that we had in the sixth form sector over pay, and talk too about how we can extend that and build on that model for colleges altogether. So that's in FE as well. But also I think the model is a good model for extending across the union. In particular, I want to look at the role of our excellent reps in the sixth form sector. We've established union groups with well-trained reps, particularly well-trained reps. We have excellent annual training, and it fits exactly with the model which was advocated yesterday in motion 20. We need to continue to build those groups in our colleges and build on that excellent record. We've got a record of fighting, and as a union we have a record of fighting, and we need to build on that. The attack on colleges from 1993 onwards has been via a reduction of funding. That reduction has disproportionately hit on the education workforce, teachers and support staff, whilst the pay of CEOs has increased. So when we struck in 2019 and the early part of 2020, we struck for increased funding, decreased workload and increased pay for all. That dispute was cut short by the pandemic, but our resolve was apparent, and I'm certain that we achieved pay parity for teaching staff in colleges with schools this year as a result of that resolve. So we got a pay rise of 3.25%, which certainly my principal informed everybody was the highest in the sector. So that was absolutely fantastic. The role of the rep then has been really crucial, and I want to tell you a little bit about what's going on in our college in terms of our rep, and to say to you all, you need to build a committee. That's one thing we've done in a larger workplace. So those of you working larger workplaces, build committees, and then defend when people come for reps. So that's happened in our place. John's an excellent rep, and if you're aware of the campaign, the I Am John Boken campaign, please support it fully, sign the petition, and be aware that we as a union, we're an anti-racist union. We go outside of just the broad the terms and conditions argument, and we need absolutely to back John fully, and to sign that petition, share it like mad. We've got new members as a result of that, and first time on picket lines for many of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jean. And we have had motion 32 proposed and seconded. I indicated earlier that the first speaker to speak for the motion will be Rob Behan. Standing order 19 has been called. Conference, so your opportunity to decide whether you want further speakers on motion 32 or not. Thank you very much. Voting is over, and 619 to 126, the standing order is carried. So we hear no further speakers on motion 32, and we put motion 32 to the vote. There's no right of reply. So we've got 775 votes in favour, 99% of the vote, 5 against, 4 abstentions. Conference, thank you very much indeed. That took us 12 minutes of the allocated 15 minutes. And we now move on to motion 33, Motion 33 on union recognition and the teachers' pension scheme coming through from the Independent Sector Conference. And we have no amendments to this motion. And the two speakers speaking in favour, proposing Sean Murtagh-Howard and then Rachel Shaw to second. We're ready with Sean. Thank you very much. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning, President. Good morning, Conference. Sean Murtagh-Howard, NEU Hertfordshire and National Council Member for the Eastern Region. Conference, teachers in the independent sector are at a defining moment. They are facing the very real threat of the loss of their teachers' pension scheme as individual employees move to leave the scheme. The TPS is a fundamental to the status of the teaching profession. The loss of the TPS would have significant detrimental impact on a teacher's pay in retirement. NEU districts, branches and regional offices have been at the forefront of the fight to retain the TPS for the independent sector. However, since the return to school, there has been a more concerted and coordinated effort from employers to leave the scheme. The NEU nationally now needs to campaign to help the independent sector teachers fight against the TPS withdrawal. Amongst other things, the NEU should vigorously refute the false arguments being employed to mislead teachers. Contrary to assertions being made by some employers, the teachers' pension scheme is not going bankrupt, nor will the recent McLeod judgment cause the TPS to go bankrupt. The government has not announced that employee contributions are going to increase any further, nor are there any plans to introduce any exit fees. I would like to further debunk misleading rumours recently peddled about the number of schools that have left the TPS. The facts are, a Department of Education Freedom of Information request on the 19th of March shows that since the 1st of September 2019, only 147 schools have left the scheme. 19 have recently given notice to withdraw by the 1st of September 2021, and as of the 19th of March, 987 schools remain. These 968 schools that see the benefits of remaining in the TPS. Conference, leaving the scheme will damage the school's ability to attract and retain quality staff. Graduates will look elsewhere if the TPS is no longer on offer. Withdrawing from the scheme will hinder the mobility of teachers between the state and independent sector, and indeed within the independent sector, between those schools who offer the TPS and those who do not. Conference, in any instances, employees are threatening to break contracts of employment using the fire and rehire tactic. This is a threat of dismissal and rehire on inferior terms. I cannot tell you, Conference, how appalling and immoral this tactic is. And Conference, I'm being polite in what I say. I do hope that the NEU will support members to challenge this practice in the courts as and when we need to. Conference, we must fight back, and we can fight back. Striking is our last resort, but where employers use draconian tactics, we must be robust in our response. NEU members have been balloted for industrial action in 40 independent schools and have successfully seen off attempts to strip away their pensions in over 50 independent schools. So when we show our collective strength, we win. Finally, Conference, I give you this stark warning. If we do not stop independent schools leaving the TPS, academy owners will see an opportunity. They will lobby and seek changes to the legislation to allow them to leave the TPS. Please support this motion. Thank you, Conference, and I move.
Thank you very much indeed, Sean. And we call Rachel Shaw from the Independent Sector Conference. Good morning, Rachel. Good to see you. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Motion 33 also asks Conference to support and promote union recognition in the independent sector. Well, everyone in this virtual room today knows the value of solidarity, but how widely do we define our solidarity at the moment? We don't yet have a definition that encompasses all teachers in all kinds of schools, let alone everyone who works in a school setting. Our motion today is based on a simple concept: solidarity among all those who work in schools, whatever the school setting might be. In fact, I would argue that solidarity should extend even further to nurses and bus drivers and care workers and everyone who delivers a public service, whether or not those services are currently held in private or public hands, because it's only through solidarity that we can achieve our goals, and not just our goals, but to win back respect for those who deliver frontline services in this country. We've moved mountains since December by standing together in the face of bitter opposition from the government and most of the press. Indeed, it's often been left to poets, such as dear Michael Rosen, writing in The Guardian, to stand up for teachers and to give lie to the spin and dissembling of the government. And we can do more if we stand together. Our motion therefore proposes that the union should be recognised in every school. Every school should have a rep and every teacher the right to negotiate collectively on their working terms and conditions, and the right to a decent pension. Only by standing together to defend the weakest and the most vulnerable, to defend the first to fall prey to increased workload and reduced pay or pension, will we stop the rot. So I call on you today to stand together as a profession and support this motion and defend the rights of everyone in education to fair pay, hours, workload and a decent pension.
Much indeed, Rachel. And with motion 33, I have got a number of speakers. I don't think I had indicated this previously. There are no speakers against. So conference standing order 19 has been invoked, which will allow you to choose whether to vote straight away on this issue, union recognition in the teachers' pension scheme. And so if we can load in the procedural motion, please. The first speaker would have been Helen Porter, may still be. Conference, it's for you to decide. Voting for will take us to the vote. Voting against will allow for a further speaker. 674 votes in favour, 94 against. So we do now proceed to the vote. Thank you very much. So that's motion 33. No amendments to it. So we are going to go to the vote and then we will move onwards to motion 34. I'll give some clarification on the timings in a moment. So we've got 776 votes in favour of motion 33, more than 99% of delegates voting in favour, 3 against, 4 abstentions. Thank you very much, conference. We therefore move onwards to motion 34. Just before I'm going to call the proposer for that, we completed 2 of the motions in that last section inside the 15 minutes allocated. So that has given us some additional time to add on later. And we also took a 7-minute break for the switch between closed session, private session and the news session. So I will be adding in that additional time so the total debating time is not reduced. We're moving to motion 34 and Meriki to propose. Good morning, Meriki.
Morning, thank you. President, Conference, Meriki Williams, Stockton, moving motion 34. As we all know all too well, funding, or lack thereof, is a huge problem in education. Across the board, schools and colleges are struggling to balance books. Budgets are at breaking point. Redundancies are on the rise and school closures are threatened, particularly in mainstream nursery schools. Real-term cuts in funding lead to cuts in staff, with support staff often the hardest hit. Losing our invaluable learning and pastoral staff, who our children, especially our SEND children, need and rely on, results in schools being unable to support students with SEND. Our students who have endured so much, who have had their mental health suffer due to routines being turned upside down due to the pandemic, who've experienced bereavement and trauma, who need mental health support, are being failed. Support and services cost money. That's the society that we live in. As educators, we want the very best for all our students, but unfortunately, it would appear those in power do not. Inadequate funding means that we simply cannot provide the right level of support from outside agencies or the resources we know would make a difference to those we teach. Following a recent schools forum meeting, I was incensed as we yet again voted to take 0.5% budgeted to the schools block and use it to top up the high needs funding block. If the DFE agree that up to 0.5% can be transferred, then surely they are actually acknowledging that the amount of funding given to high needs is not enough. SEND deserves to be funded properly, without local authorities having to resort to moving money from one already underfunded block to the other, robbing Peter to pay Paul. This is quite frankly scandalous. 0.5% being topsized in our relatively small local authority is just over £500,000, 687,000. Multiply that across all local authorities. Just how much is our high needs funding block being underfunded by? Imagine a society where funding wasn't an issue. How many children would benefit? How many more would have their needs met? How many jobs could be saved? How many settings could remain open? If the funding for high needs was funded fairly and properly and not having to be topped up by other school budgets. Having spent a good while complaining about this to the amazing Senko at my school, another email pinged in her inbox. An EHCP had finally been approved for a child who so desperately needs support. Brilliant, we thought, until we spotted that it hadn't come with any funding attached. How are we supposed to put into plan any action without the money with which to do so? It's like trying to bake a cake but not being allowed to use any utensils and your oven's on the fritz and just never gets hot enough. It's not a good situation to be in. EHCPs take ages to get, and them not automatically coming with the funding needed to support a child means the child then has to go even longer without the required level of support, as schools don't have the funding in the first place, and in some cases don't know the level of funding that will eventually be awarded, making things like advertising and hiring one-to-one support extremely difficult, and essentially is letting the child at the centre of it all down. Children and young people with SEND and their families deserve better. Please support the motion and both amendments, as we believe they are strengthening. Together we can make a difference. Thank you. I move.
Thank you very much indeed, Merricky. And we pass across to Lee Seathouse. Good morning, Lee.
Good morning, President. Good morning, Conference. The government's pupil premium funding change is a stealth cut to school budgets at a time when children need more support than ever. The decision by ministers to base pupil premium funding on free school meals data collected in autumn instead of the spring term shows disregard for children's futures as we recover from this pandemic, as pupil premium cash will not now factor in those pupils which became eligible for free school meals between October and January. A quarter of the councils in England have reported that almost 30,000 more children across the country became eligible for free school meals between the October and January. If this is extrapolated across the country, around 120,000 children stand to lose out on roughly 133 million in additional funding. The pupil premium gives schools 1,345 for every pupil in primary and 955 for every secondary pupil who claims free school meals who have claimed them in the last 6 years. The result of not using this data is that schools will have more children on their roll who need pupil premium support, but without the funding to provide that support for more than a year. It's another example, like the free school meals debacle, of the government pretending to care for our disadvantaged children, but then not backing that feigned support and money and resources. Another huge funding concern is around the AP and PRU sector, with some areas seeing as much as a 40% decline in referrals. There is no denying that funding for PRUs and AP is complex, inconsistent, and for too many, uncertain. APs are typically funded on a per-place basis. This basic allocation is then topped up from other sources such as high needs funding and local commissioning. The underlying issue is that, like pupil premium funding, education and skills funding agency place funding is based on census returns on a particular point in time. It fails to take into account AP schools' fluctuating roles. Some moments in time will simply record more young people enroll in alternative provision. In normal times, this is problematic enough. With the disruptions of lockdowns and partial closures, it really potentially leads to catastrophic levels. There is now a real risk that the infrastructure to prevent exclusions and provide a continuity of education will simply not be available when we come to need it again. Caring for vulnerable children surely deserves a long-term plan. The way in which both pupil premium funding and AP funding is decided needs to be addressed urgently and reformed. We need to be campaigning for a robust and suitable funding formula. a formula that is fair and one which ensures that all SEND students have access to the support that they are entitled to when they need it, not being added to a never-ending waiting list with the support often arriving too late. Conference, I second.
Thank you very much indeed, Lee. And as previously indicated, we're going to go to the amendment to motion 34, amendment 34.1. And we should be able to call Emma Parker to propose. Good morning to Emma. Good to see you.
President, Conference, Emma Parker, Durham, proposing amendment 34.1. Children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities are in every sector of education with varying levels of need and support. Every educator is an educator for children and young people with SEND. But for many of our educators in SEND and alternative provisions, what they do on a day-to-day basis is very, very different from those who teach and support in mainstream settings. As a SEND educator and a parent of 3 very different and amazing autistic boys, I can say firsthand that the experiences and support our young people, families and educators receive varies widely. SEND truly is a postcode lottery. Our education system is under attack. Every one of us here today will have seen and heard the rhetoric from government over the last year. Children with SEND are being failed by schools. Children's mental health has been impacted by the pandemic, a stick used to beat education settings, educators and parents with, and the most recent announcement that our children lack discipline and we need behaviour hubs. Today, I put the government on notice. We will not let you attack our children, our settings, our families and our members. The crisis we see ourselves in is a crisis of your making. How dare you use mental health as a tool to attack our members and as an excuse to reopen schools, when over the last 10 years you have decimated family services such as the closure of suicide centres, and our children's mental health service is at breaking point, with families waiting months for urgent support and years for diagnosis. It has taken 6 years for my 3 children to get their diagnoses. Our children do not need behaviour hubs or to walk silently in corridors. What they need is dedicated trained staff to support them, to listen to them, to unpick what is going on in their lives and support them through their crises. But instead of our schools hiring staff and paying for external support for these young people, we have seen a huge rise in redundancies because our settings are at financial breaking point. For years, myself and others have campaigned for SEND funding, the right to an inclusive education system, and spoken about the appalling situation we find ourselves in as parents and educators. But we need more. Our union is about organising. It is about engagement and it is about collectivisation. We make a stand when we are attacked and when we see an injustice. Families, children and young people and our members need us. We need an organising forum where we can work with professionals from around the country, where educators from specialist settings, PRUs and those who support children in mainstream settings can collectively organise against this harsh and uncaring government to ensure that all of our members and young people in every setting are supported and listened to. Please support this amendment. Together we are stronger. Together we can make a difference. Together we can ensure that the voices of all of our members in all settings and the children we support are heard loudly. Together we can shape our education system to be truly inclusive. Conference, I move.
Thank you very much, Emma. And we pass from Emma to Stacey Denai, who's going to be seconding the amendment 34.1. Just to let conference know, we do have a speaker against this amendment. So after Stacey has seconded, I'm going to be calling Ellie Sharp from Croydon, please. Thank you for your patience, Stacey. You have up to 3 minutes.
President, Conference. Motion 34 is a strong motion and calls to support students with special educational needs and disabilities within education in a way that is vital to allowing children to have their right to education met. Amendment 34.1 will strengthen this motion through the addition of a statement about living financial support that often would not be considered or even known about unless you have been in a situation to experience the difficulties in accessing it. Many adults with additional needs who need to access secondary education for a longer period of time than their peers find that living financial support is difficult to access in order to facilitate this. This means that many young adults in this situation have to leave education with little or no qualifications or have to battle with the benefit system in order to stay in education. This highlights the inequality for students with special educational needs. Young adults can have an educational health and care plan, a legal document in place until they are 25 years old. Therefore, living financial support should be easy to access for these students to support their education until they are 25 years old. Students and their families should not have to fight the benefit system and rely upon their knowledge of special educational needs or where to seek support in order to get something that they should be entitled to. It should be there to enable those with special educational needs and disabilities to gain the necessary qualifications needed to enter employment and have greater independence. Amendment 34.1 asks you, Conference, to support the highlighting of this inequality in education and the benefit system, and that is why I second this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stacey. And we move, as previously indicated, straight to Ellie Sharp from Croydon. Ellie wishes to speak against this amendment. Thank you very much, Ellie. You have your 3 minutes.
Thank you. I want to start by saying I wholeheartedly agree with the essence behind this amendment. The only point I want to make is on the setup of the SEND organising forum. The question I ask is, are these official bureaucratic organising forums a necessity for effective organising to happen? Where do we stop with creating these organising forums for every section? They aren't the only way forward, and there are more productive ways of organising. Grassroots and informal networks are a fantastic way to organise activists and campaign locally and nationwide. Having something created by members, for members, means we can respond more rapidly to things that come up, be more flexible with how we organise and shape action, involve more people as we don't have barriers such as elections, and members and communities can be more integrated and take more ownership in all the campaigning that happens. I'll leave you with that to think about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ellie. And I'm just looking at my list of speakers for Amendment 34.1. The next speaker in favour is Jenny Cooper from Brent, but we do have Standing Order 20 activated. So Jenny, if you just hold fire for a moment, Conference is going to be asked whether or not they wish to move to the vote on the amendment. So we're just putting Standing Order 20, it's already there, ready to vote. We've got 602 votes in favour, 158 against, 8 abstentions. So that means, Conference, that we now move to the vote on Amendment 34.1. Amendment 34.1 to the vote. Procedural votes are always on the basis of one member, one vote. And 718 in favour, 79 against. So we do indeed now move back to motion 34 as amended. It's very substantially amended. And Standing Order 21 has been called. There are no speakers against motion 34. I would have been about to call Debs Gwynn to speak in favour, but there are no speakers against. So, Conference, you're being asked whether you wish to hear any further speakers in support of the motion as amended. And Conference, 77%, 606 of you wish to go straight to the vote, as against 171 and 7 abstentions. I do need to just call Meriki up on the screen, if I may, just to ask Meriki if she wishes to exercise her right to reply.
Yes, please.
That's a yes, so we'll get you up on the screen. We heard your voice, but there we go. Meriki,
Thank you.
Come and gone. I think we're good now. Thank you very much, Meriki. You have 3 minutes if you wish to use some or all of that.
Thank you. I'll be brief. First of all, I can appreciate Ellie's comments. Thank you for making them. However, grassroots organising doesn't stop just because there is a formal mechanism in place, such as an organising forum. As a member of the National Council for New Professionals and Young Workers, alongside Ellie, we do an awful lot of grassroots organising, particularly in our respective regions, Northern and London. Great things come out of organising forums. For example, the Women's Forum, that's where the domestic abuse policy came from. Organising forums have their place. Not saying it's the panacea of everything. However, they do have their place and they can be a brilliant organising tool. And it is something a lot of members in our area in SEND settings have asked for. Also, there are 2 points in this amendment. It's not just about that. So how can you go against highlighting the inequalities of EHCPs from our older young people? It's baffling. You can't prevent people over the age of 18 from having the same access to stuff for their EHCPs purely because you're against an organising forum. So please, please, everybody, do not let that sway your vote. Please vote for this motion and let's put an end to the crisis in SEND funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariki. So we move to the vote on motion 34 as amended. Motion 34 as amended. We got the result in on motion 34. 99%, 801 of you voting in support of motion 34 as amended, 6 against, 4 abstentions. Conference, thank you. So we're moving to motion 35. Linda Goodwin is going to be proposing. Amanda Martin is going to be seconding motion 35, and the amendment which will follow straight on from that is Leslie Jackson to propose and Amy Murch from Sheffield to second. And conference, I will also advise you just before we hear from Linda that we do have speakers on both the motion and the amendment, but no speakers against. So thank you very much. Good morning. Good to see you, Linda. You have up to 4 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Morning, President Conference. Linda Goodwin from Staffordshire, moving motion 35. At the first NEU conference in 2019, we passed unanimously motion 15, calling for urgent action to expose and address the crisis in early years funding. However, 2 years later, there are fewer maintained nursery schools with no guarantee of viable long-term funding and the threat of closure for many more of these crucial early years settings. Throughout the pandemic, along with other school settings, they remained open for key workers and at-risk children, and in the recent lockdown to all their children. However, unlike other education settings, such as primary and secondary schools, they were unable to access additional funding and resources to keep settings COVID-19 secure. However, having to use their own budget to purchase PPE equipment and cleaning materials. These additional costs, compounded with the loss of parental additional income, have only worsened the perilous funding situation the sector was already under. During a fringe meeting I attended yesterday afternoon, a nursery school head teacher explained that they relied on fundraising to generate 1/4 of their income. She went on to explain they will be faced with a massive deficit they cannot possibly pay off, which will result in the local authority requiring deficit recovery plans. Many nursery schools are being forced down this route, facing restructures, redundancies, and huge cuts in provision. Over 60% of maintained nursery schools are expecting an in-year or increased deficit on their budget because of the pandemic. This deficit is not of their making. It has been forced on them through inadequate government policies. Conference, this is a shocking situation. Nursery schools and their staff are the precious foundations of our education system. They provide an essential building block in our youngest children's development with their enriched, child-centered curriculum based on research and pedagogy, promoting active learning, nurturing curiosity and problem solving, allowing children to grow and flourish. The government's funding of nursery education for the youngest children lacks vision and is leaving many children without access to the essential support and services their families may need. I congratulate congratulate members who have been campaigning tirelessly over the years, supported by the union, to save their nursery schools and early years settings, and the recent Zoom rally and Twitter storm. Please support this motion and Amendment 1 to continue the campaign. Conference, I move.
Thank you very much, Linda. And we pass from Linda to Amanda Martin, substitute speaker from Portsmouth, who is speaking. Good morning, Amanda. We can see you. You're good to go with up to 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Robin. Amanda Martin from Portsmouth, President Conference. It's almost like deja vu sitting here, as in 2019, alongside Linda, I seconded the motion she mentioned in her speech. But delegates, deja vu would mean we're in the same position, and we're not. The funding our nursery schools and the motion notes has become even more precarious, and the security for staff, pupils, and the communities they serve even more challenging and worrying. Nursery schools are not afforded a budget plan. They wait almost termly with a begging bowl for what the latest government morsels will be. And this is not new. It's been going on for decades. There is no way to fund what should be the bedrock, the launch pad for all our mini pocket rockets into education. Before lockdown, one of the first roles I did as your national president was to attend a mini, and I say mini because it was full of amazing little people, petition hand-in at 10 Downing Street to ask for more and sustained funding. Those attending the hand-in included nursery leaders, nursery workers, parents, politicians, trade union, community groups and children. The petition contained thousands of signatures, and behind every signature, there was an emotional story. The leader, Anne, who's faced devastating restructure after restructure and seen ratios and deficits rise. The Rakour family, whose child had enjoyed a fantastic start to life in his local maintained nursery with local friends and his SEND needs being met, giving him the best start in life and an impact on his whole family. Or Raj, a beautiful 3-year-old in the care system who every day sees hundreds of smiles and lots of safe and secure places to learn. Or Rachel, the single parent who's been able to retrain at university, knowing her twins have the best start in life. Not long after this petition, COVID hit, but our maintained nursery colleagues and their communities didn't stop. The momentum they had started, and like so many things in education during this pandemic, the reality of why we must continue became more stark and more vital. Our maintained nurseries didn't work alone. Private nursery staff became involved in areas across the union, rep training and health and safety reps, and a fantastic network has developed, growing and supported by Jacinda and Henry in Hamilton House, and bringing along other unions and early years education groups. And why? Well, because many of these remained open and all remained worried about funding and survival. In the face of fear, there has been no flight in our nurseries, but a fight. I know as a reception teacher the value good nursery education provides, the importance of play, skilled staff and support that they provide to the communities they serve, and the smiles they put on the pupils' faces as they give them the best start in life in their education journey. Conference, we should be campaigning for more maintained nursery schools, not accepting the government's chaotic, shambolic mess of ad hoc, ill-funded system. Now is the time for us all to come together, to fight collectively for nursery education in this country. We must stand alongside what, for me, are the best, most crafted and skilled professionals in this business. We cannot afford to let these colleagues fight alone, and we cannot afford to let this government fail our kids again. What cost is ignorance? Conference, this may be one of the last motions, but it is one of the most important. So when we leave and go back to our workplaces...
Thank you very much, Amanda. I'm afraid that your time has slipped away as you were seconding motion 35. We're going to move directly to amendment 35.1 and Leslie Jackson from Cambridgeshire to propose, please. Good morning, Leslie. You have your 4 minutes. Enjoy. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, President Conference. 35.1 is a strengthening amendment and seeks to reflect the increasing work of the early years sector in the union and the need for a nursery educators network. Here in Cambridgeshire, we're lucky to have a lead in the nursery sector and to be guided in this sector by an experienced expert in the field. Unfortunately, that's not me. She can't be here to do the speech herself and entrusted me to deliver the message. I do hope I give her exemplary work for nurseries justice, and the early years sector would be a much bleaker place without Paula Champion at the helm. All of the points in the amendments call for support in building union strength in the sector. We're a small sector and we can shout loudly, but we also need dedicated workers to our campaign in order to support us in taking action against a government who want to wipe out state-maintained nursery schools. The government want to provide the absolute minimum provision in early years and in order to deliver us in the hands of the private sector. We recognise we have specific demands as state educators regarding state funding, and we will call for all nurseries to be state funded. Currently in Cambridgeshire, we have only 6 state maintained nurseries and we want to keep them. Our budgets have been slashed. During the pandemic, we've lost 1/3 of our staff, all support staff, and 1/3 of our buildings as well. We have no funding at all for PPE during this pandemic, and this has put us into an unmanageable deficit. We are a sector that is clear on pedagogy, and we are leading the way in child-led learning, and we need full weight of the union behind us as we challenge the government as they seek to bleed our funding away. Why should our little learners suffer because of the government's refusal to provide the necessary safety equipment and funding in order to learn? The fight has already begun in Cambridgeshire with our recent day of action. It was very successful. We engaged with 5,000 people across various social media platforms, and our rally had many voices from our sector as well across the union, and we need to build on that now and join with our colleagues and organisations in various other sectors, including the independent voluntary sector, as well as parents, if we want to keep our precious nurseries. Please vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And we call Amy Murch. Amy is going to be seconding Amendment 35.1. Amy from Sheffield. Thank you very much, Amy. Good to see you. You have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. President Conference. Across schools and colleges, funding has been an issue that has been at the forefront of union campaigning, and rightly so. But we also need to be prepared to support our members in maintained nursery schools who are at a critical point with regards to funding. The funding formula that currently exists is woefully inadequate and will have a massive impact on workplaces. Many maintained nursery schools already have to raise funds to ensure they generate the income needed, and this often falls to the staff. The COVID-19 crisis has only worsened the situation that many nursery schools find themselves in, a number of which, 200 since 1995, have closed, and there are many more that will meet the same fate. They are under real threat. Our early years educators can feel isolated and forgotten on our union, but the COVID-19 crisis has had a positive impact on the organisation of the sector. When primary schools closed in January, nurseries were kept open. Members across the nursery sector came together to fight the unsafe working conditions they faced. However, it is important that all educators have an understanding of the difficulties the early years face, whether we're in a pandemic or not. This needs to become visible, more visible to all members. The early years education that our children receive is so important, and the attacks that are coming to the pedagogical practices that early years educators know to be the right ones need to be fought, and members of the NEU can be central to that. The environments that are created offer children the rich beginnings needed in the early years, which are crucial to the years that come thereafter. Often, as we know across all education sectors, the changes that are implemented are not decided upon by those who actually know about education, and nursery schools are no exception. There is some great work happening in the union, and this needs to be built upon, and that's why we need to develop further the network of nursery educators so that strategy and practices can be shared. The union can support nursery educators to facilitate this, and we should. Not all nurseries are attached to a school, and they are often small. So the establishment of a network with full union support would ensure so many of the things spoken about in Amendment 20.2 can happen. We can reach members and increase the membership within the sector. The difficulties faced in nursery settings need the full support of all of us that are the union, and we need to hear from our early years colleagues today. It becomes all of our responsibility to listen, shout about and support colleagues who work in the sector. Nursery colleagues held a day of action on the 24th of March and the Twitter storm on March the 2nd, and this was supported by some branches, but we all need to get behind the action that will follow. We need to ensure that the funding crisis that nursery educators face become part of the fight for all of us. Conference, let's hear from our early years practitioners today. I second.
Thank you very much, Amy. And that is Amendment 35.1 proposed and seconded. And Conference Standing Order 20 is being applied. We will therefore be taking a vote straight away on whether you wish to hear any speakers. It would have been Judy Cox from Tower Hamlets in the City to speak for, then Simon O'Hara from Warwickshire. A reminder that if you are voting for, then we won't hear them. We will go straight to the vote. So we've got 633 of you would wish to proceed to the vote, 181 against. So we are now going to proceed to the vote on Amendment 35.1 without hearing any further speakers. Thank you. And just to repeat, after we've completed business on motion 35, which will be still a few moments away, understanding order 24, I will be reverting to unfinished business from an earlier section, details of which will follow. You're voting now on Amendment 35.1. And our time is up for voting on that amendment. The amendment is carried very substantially, 841 votes, 99% of the vote in favour, and just 4 people who have registered a vote against, 7 abstentions on Amendment 35.1. So we return to the main motion as amended, and just looking at my list of speakers to see if we have any speakers against. We don't. I would have to take one if there was one. The first speaker on that motion to speak for, Jess Edwards. So Jess, if you can just be on standby because the standing order has been called. So once again, we're just asking conference to decide under standing order 19 whether you wish to go straight to the vote at this point. Voting window is closed, so we can see that vast majority of you would like to now go straight to the vote on motion 35 as amended with the only amendment that's there, 35.1. So funding for nursery schools, motion 35 as amended. Voting window is closed. We're just waiting for the vote. 859 in favour, more than 99% of you supporting motion 35 as amended. Just 1 vote against and 1 abstention. Conference, thank you very much. I'm now going to just explain about the sequence in which I am calling unfinished business and the reason for it. I will tell you, conference, that I'm going to be calling motion 19. I'll explain why in a moment, but before I do give that explanation, conference, I want to make sure that the speakers are ready. You will recall on motion 19 that Louise Lewis of Kirklees had proposed the motion. Lisa Walsh of Leeds had seconded the motion. I'm just finding the right page for my list of speakers. And we were just about to proceed to Amendment 19.1. Amendment 19.1 is going to be proposed in a moment by Sheila Kavanagh, seconded by Phil Clark. And we do have speakers against Amendment 19.1. So I will be looking to call Zinat Syed of Barnet, after I've heard from Sheila Kavanagh and Phil Clark proposing and seconding. But conference, I do want to give a little bit of an explanation about the sequence that I'm taking things in. And I want to pay due credit and show my appreciation to Conference Committee in this announcement. Delegates, Conference Committee is elected by you. It's elected by you to make decisions about the smooth running and operation of conference. Their principal job is in ordering the agenda for conference and in allocating time to each section. And they do that based conference on your decisions through districts on the prioritization of motions. They bring the agenda and that sequence of time and the ordering of the motions to you in the report of Conference Committee. And you'll remember that Gerald presented that to you on the very first morning of conference. And conference, you accepted that report. And that report gives us the time allocations and it gives us, conference, the sequence in which motions are to be taken. Subsequently, of course, we have had some unfinished business. And so Conference Committee met last late afternoon yesterday to consider with care what they should do about unfinished business. And there is clearly a debate that they had to have around the sequencing of unfinished business. Conference, they completed their deliberations. I am not a member of conference committee, but I do attend as an observer. They completed their deliberations and published that report to you. That report indicated, it doesn't provide their detailed reasoning, but indicated that motion 19 would be taken as the first item of unfinished business. And then we would move on to, I think it is motion 22, which was the unfinished item from the equalities conferences. That report came to you after conference committee early yesterday evening. Understanding order 5, there is the potential to submit an amendment to conference committee decisions. No such amendment was submitted. So as chair, I have no choice but to follow the sequence that has been provided to me by conference committee. I don't have any discretion. So thank you very much indeed for listening and understanding that. And hopefully that explanation helps both new members to conference and established delegates understand the flow of how these decisions are made. I'm going to call on Sheila Kavanagh. Hopefully now we have got all our speakers lined up. We have indeed. Sheila has got 4 minutes, up to 4 minutes, to propose Amendment 19.1. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Conference Chair. This is a strengthening amendment. You'll find it on page 37. It's supported by the movers of the motion. It takes nothing away from the main motion. It supports caseworkers, reps, branch secretaries. It strengthens the union, empowers agency workers and stops the rip-off. The agency workers regulations state that a worker is entitled to be paid the same MPS rate as a permanently contracted worker after 12 weeks in the same role with the same hirer. It's the law. A worrying number of rip-off agencies fail to pay the uplift at 12 weeks, and they continue to avoid paying workers their full rate, sometimes for years. They just won't pay the going rate. They'd rather break the law. More members are becoming aware of their rights under AWR. The screen's frozen. I'm trying to get this done in 2 minutes for you. Right. More members are becoming aware of their rights under AWR, so the amount of AWR casework is increasing. It's a niche area of the law, but what hinders successfully bringing a claim is the time limitation, just 12 weeks. It's easy for a case to be timed out if caseworkers don't have training or experience. Assessing the merits of a case is very time consuming. Prototype software to assess AWR cases has already been designed by women NEU activists with years of experience in handling NEU AWR casework. It's not a cottage industry. It needs to be computerised, standardised and accelerated to serve members' needs quickly and reliably. An online tool would work day and night, addressing several complex queries at once. It's what caseworkers want. The NEU has a suite of updated AWR materials for members, and more training is already being rolled out for officers. The Alternatives to Agencies initiative now includes bargaining for supply staff in all negotiations with employers. We want to keep this work in-house, but if we don't move fast, some no-win, no-fee firm of lawyers will see a golden opportunity to make even more money out of agency workers. We want our members to get every penny back. They worked for it. It's their money. Please support this constructive amendment, and solidarity to the equalities motion. I hope they get heard too. Let's do this quickly. I'm finished.
Thank you very much indeed, Sheila, and you coped very well with the technical hitch as your screen froze as well. Just before I call Phil Clark, I just want to make a straightforward observation from the chair in relation to Amendment 19.1.8, where it says adopt the online AWR claims assessor. I must advise conference that if you do pass this amendment, that any procurement would have to go through the normal NEU procurement procedures. So that needs to just be very clear. It's not an automatic adoption of one particular provider. Thank you very much. I'm going to Phil Clark from Lewis, Eastbourne and Wealdon to second the motion. Good morning, Phil.
Morning, Robin. All right, let's do this super quick. As chair of the Supply Organising Forum, I'm well aware supply teachers have had a very, very difficult year. Not just the sort of health and safety concerns that all our members have had, but in many cases just been basically part of a furlough lottery. And it's completely exposed how bad the privatised agency system is. The union's got a strategy which is effectively two-pronged. One is working on alternative to agencies and trying to replace them in a number of different ways, which I don't have time to go into now. But that's only going to be successful if we can try and prevent agencies being the super cheap option, and we do that through robust enforcement of agency worker regulation claims. We need to get better systems at handling agency worker regulation claims, which is what this is all about. As Robin said, the software mentioned will go through the standard robust procurement processes. You know, it won't be purchased if it's not value for money and if it's not, bought in the right way. So I'd really encourage people to support this, and really, really importantly, because I don't have time to go into it, look out for the alternative to agencies pack and get your heads around our strategy to improve conditions for supply members, because it's a serious one and it needs picking up across the union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. And as previously indicated, we do have a speaker against Amendment 19.1. So I must take at least one speaker against, and that's Zinat Syed of Barnet. Good morning, Zinat.
Right, good morning. Thank you, dear conference and chair. Thank you. I'm a supply teacher and an organising forum officer and a first-time speaker. I'm going to explain some of the background and the reasons that I urge you to vote against this amendment. The alternative to agencies mentioned in the executive report discriminates against the majority of supply members who are agency workers. It was set up by a working party of 3 to 4 people from the Supply Organising Forum to look at the re-establishment of local authority supply pool or a national register. It was not reviewed by the wider group of Organising Forum officers and appeared as an NEU policy with a title that was never discussed. Many of us think that this is a policy with a lot of flaws. It has been used to stop the initiative to get supply members back to work during lockdown. These proposals were scrutinised by a small group, but none of it has gone out to the field of supply officers or activists who are doing a really good job of supporting members. This did not have the approval of the Supply Organising Forum. The effective working majority of the elected of had to boycott the last formal meeting on the 27th of March as we were not consulted properly. Our official WhatsApp was also closed down because we could not debate on the A2A or AWR toolkit. Is this toolkit a simple calculator and a flowchart, or is it a more elaborate commercial product? In which case there is a lack of transparency and we don't know what it will do. Conference is being asked to vote on an app which we don't know the cost or what it looks like. It's crazy to think that an app or a toolkit will negotiate with an employer. The issue is not whether someone has an AWR claim, but whether there is an experienced negotiator working at regional level. A local lay officer is not going to know the employer that could be based 300 miles away where the employer is an agency. We need regional specialists to bargain for the supply members across a region or a number of regions. We don't need a toolkit or an app, but we need a campaigning officer to keep all supply members informed of their rights and to have the authority to negotiate with companies that are often nationally based. You never know when any one of us in this conference may end up as a supply member. I urge you to vote against this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zinat. And we are looking to call the next speaker on Amendment 19.1 in favour, and that is Martin Powell-Davis, please. Good morning, Martin. You're speaking in favour of Amendment 19.1.
Well, President Conference, I'll take even less time there. Sorry for the hitch, but I just wanted to address 3 of the concerns that have been raised. Firstly, alternative to agencies can certainly be finessed and further worked on, but it opens up a strategy for the union to start to reverse the privatisation of agencies. Secondly, the assessor software. I agree that as delegates, we can't possibly be in a position to assess the precise costs and benefits, but we've been given the reassurance that it would be subject to a full procurement process, and we should involve existing AWR specialists in that. Is it necessary at all? Well, no software tool can replace trained staff and branch caseworkers, but if alongside the key points in the main motion and amendment, it can assist them, then I think we should test out what it can achieve. But the amendment is about a lot more than the AWR assessor. Due to time, I'll leave delegates to read the points about bargaining, about training, about streamlining procedures. But there may perhaps be a second set of concerns, or a third set, perhaps unspoken fears of secretaries and caseworkers listening to this debate, wondering if a campaign to appraise supply members of their legal rights actually means more calls and more emails when they can't cope with the ones they've got already. And that's why I conclude by saying this amendment has to be taken in the context of the overall motion. We need a full and honest discussion about our casework systems and capacity at lay and staff level and our strategies to meet casework demands. On that basis, please support the amendment and the main motion.
Thank you very much, Martin. I'm just looking to see who our next speaker would be. Standing Order 20 has been invoked, this time before I called the speaker. I do need to just be very clear that if I have called a speaker, then they do get the right to speak ahead of the standing order coming in. But Standing Order 20 has been activated before the speaker was called. So you are now voting, please. Standing Order 20, whether you wish to move to the vote on the amendment. If you do decide to conference to proceed to the vote on Amendment 19.1, there is a right of reply to the proposer. No, I'm incorrect. And that is I've got that completely wrong. Apologies, conference. 759 of you wish to move to the vote, 73 against. The right of reply comes in later. My apologies. I'm jumping the gun. We are in a position where we're now able to move to a vote on Amendment 19.1, please. Thank you, conference. It's just beginning to feel like it's been a long 3 days. Thank you very much, conference. That's voting on Amendment 19.1. 757 of you voting in favour of Amendment 19.1, 83 of you voting against. And we now revert to the main motion as amended. And there is Standing Order 21. So, conference, you now get another choice, which is whether you wish to hear any speakers. I'm afraid, apologies, we can't activate Standing Order 21 at this stage because I do have speakers against. My apologies, I was just turning the page back. So if we can remove that, please, from the vote. And I need to call the first speaker against motion 19. This is Pat Carew from West Essex, has indicated a desire to speak against motion 19 as amended. Pat, if you would please come on the screen. Good morning. Good to see you, Pat.
Hello, Robin. While this is, on the whole, an excellent motion, it does not sufficiently address what is to be done while waiting for facilities time money to be restored. Better online resources, while good, are not the answer, because, as Louise Lewis said, what needs to be avoided are disciplinaries being taken against reps because they have defended a member or have pointed out a health and safety breach in the workplace. This is already happening, and we are losing some health and safety reps as a result of their seeing the actions taken against reps for raising health and safety and risk assessment concerns. Casework and health and safety breaches should be taken to the senior management by union officials from outside the school. Money not yet allocated due to the suspension of in-person events could be used on a temporary basis to fund this extra casework. Also, there has been a wish from several retired members, some of whom are casework trained, to represent members' concerns to schools. Both of these measures would lessen the risk of exposure of reps to potential harm. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Pat. And I do need to advise conference that I have managed to go slightly in the wrong order there. I don't think it's going to be a problem because Pat would have still had the opportunity to speak. I would have had to call her, but Standing Order 21 was called. Standing Order 21 is the standing order that stops us from proceeding to Amendment 19.2. The reason I missed it is I hadn't turned over the page to see that there was an Amendment 19.2. So, conference, this is the way we will now proceed. We're going to put Standing Order 21 to you. If you vote in favour of it, we will not hear Amendment 19.2. My thanks to Karen, who's given me very good advice. And if you vote against Standing Order 21, we will get to hear Amendment 19.2. So have a look at the wording of Amendment 19.2, make a decision, conference, whether you wish to hear it. So the votes have been cast and counted. And the majority of you, 65% against 33%, would now wish to revert to the main motion as amended. So we will not hear Amendment 19.2. This is the point when I should have called Pat to speak, but she's had the opportunity to speak. So we are back with the main motion as amended. And conference Standing Order 19 has been invoked, which means we have the opportunity now to decide whether we wish to hear any more speakers on the motion as amended. A vote for, and we will go straight to the vote on motion 19 after a right of reply. A vote against, and I will call more speakers. We've got the result in. 717 of you wish to move to a vote on motion 19 as amended, 107 against, with 4 abstentions, which means we now move to the right of reply on motion 19 as amended. There have been speeches against, so I'm looking to see if Louise Lewis of Kirklees is available. Thank you, Louise. It's some time ago that you first proposed this, but we're now back with it. Your opportunity to give a right of reply in up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Conference. I'm going to keep this really short so we can move on. And thank you, Pat, for her contribution. But as a victimised rep, I wholeheartedly agree with this motion and the amendment. So please, can we move on to voting? And I urge everyone to vote for this motion with the amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. And so, Conference, you now get the opportunity to vote on motion 19 as amended. As previously indicated, we do have some additional time. I will take that debating time, and I am going to next call motion 22. I will remind you where we got to in that debate in a few minutes. The result of motion 19, 818 votes in favour, 12 against, 8 abstentions, overwhelmingly carried. Thank you, Conference. And we had got as far as Amendment 22.1. Gerald Clark had moved, Leslie Corrington had seconded, and Annette Price had spoken against. And I'm calling Tanya Ziegler from West Hampshire to speak for Amendment 22.1. Good morning, Tanya. Thank you very much indeed. You have got up to 3 minutes to speak in favour of Amendment 22.1. Thank you.
Good morning, President, and thank you. Hello, Conference. This is my first time ever as a speaker. Can I remind Conference that from yesterday, the proposer Gerald and the seconder Leslie stressed that the thrust of Amendment 22.1 is the issue of legal compliance. I'm a caseworker and health and safety officer. When I'm representing members, the integrity of our union is our strongest asset. It is vitally important that we stay inside the law, and we must avoid bringing the union into disrepute. Amendment 22.1 simply ensures that any definition agreed by the NEU is not in breach of the law. The Working Party can explore the legal issues. We do not have to commit now to going above and beyond legal compliance. This will allow us to go forward in unity. Conference, please support the amendment.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And I'm looking at my list of speakers on Amendment 22.1. A standing order has been invoked. It's Standing Order 20. Conference, you are very familiar with this process. So we are now proceeding to vote. Proceeding to decide whether we wish to vote on Amendment 22.1. I do have more speakers who would wish to speak. And Conference, you have indicated that you would wish to move to the vote on the amendment at this point. I just need to call Casey onto the screen, please. Casey, as the original proposer, you have the option of exercising your right of reply at this point, if you would like to.
I would like to do that, please, President.
Thank you. You have your 3 minutes. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you. With such a short space of time given to all of the equalities motions, it is really sad that there has been a weakening amendment to the LGBT plus motion. Not any of the other equalities motions, but here we are again. I'd like to take a moment to thank the signers who are doing an absolutely amazing job. Why are they there? They're not there because of minimum legal requirements. They are there because of strong and repeated requests from our deaf members. If it was a legal requirement, Boris Johnson would have them on his press conferences. But as a trade union, we rightly go above and beyond minimum legal requirements. And why would we not do that? Going beyond minimum legal requirements is part of the successful motion that we passed yesterday, Conference, for the Black Educators motion. Absolutely. We are fighting for equality and a government, actually, that is against equality. And that is what I hope we will always do. As LGBT members, we have been here before. We actually have LGBT plus members who were teaching, not just students in 1988, when Section 28, prohibiting the promotion of homosexuality in schools, was government legal policy. The irony being here that the legal implications of Section 28 meant that we should not support LGBT members then, but we did, because we knew that law was wrong. And I'm sorry to say the overwhelming, in fact, I'm not sorry to say, I'm very happy to say that the overwhelming support and solidarity for the T, like me, and non-binary people from the L and the G and the B shows that this is not a niche cause by dangerous trans rights activists, whatever they are. It is just what is right. Read the demands from the Pimlico Academy students and see how they prioritise trans and non-binary rights. The debate around trans rights is sadly just not a debate. All of the kerfuffle around the Gender Recognition Act doesn't change anything for me. I can already go into women's protected spaces as a woman, and I can do that under the Equalities Act of 2010. But still, we have to listen to worrying about the Gender Recognition Act, which only means I can change a name on my birth certificate and that my ex-wife can't have a say in whether I'm allowed to do that or not. It's disingenuous, basically. And I'd also like to say, I spoke at many, many districts in my election campaigning to talk about what trans rights is about and what it's not about. And I'm happy to talk to members about what transphobia is. And I would hope that you would bring the Trans and Non-Binary Network to explain that to you, because I listen to what racism is from Black members. We fight for equality in our union, frankly. Otherwise, we are not a union. The clue is in the name, Conference. Vote for our motion.
Thank you very much, Casey, just fading out as the time elapsed. And so, Conference, we move to the vote after the right of reply having been exercised on Amendment 22.1. The amendment has been lost. So, Conference, Amendment 22.1 falls. I am going to just suspend debate on this motion. It appears later on in our business this afternoon. So we are very hopeful of the opportunity to return to debate on that motion, and the issue then under consideration will be progression to Amendment 22.2 or not. Conference, that will be entirely in your hands. And so, conference, it gives me immense pleasure to be introducing to you two people who need no introduction. The joint general secretaries of our National Education Union are public figures, well known for their contributions to national education debate, and who have led our union, I would say especially across the last year, in an exceptional fashion. It's a job that is immensely demanding, requires extraordinary insight, skill, and patience, remembering that all the time they are seeking to balance, represent, and speak on behalf of our very varied 450,000 members. It is at this point that we would ordinarily join together in a huge round of appreciative applause for our joint General Secretaries. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, President. Thank you, delegates. President, Conference, who of us could have predicted in January last year what 2020 would bring? What a terrible thing COVID has been for our nation and our world. For all those who've died and for their grieving families and friends. For all those children and young people whose education has been so disrupted. For our members who've been heroic in their dedication to their pupils. And in times of fear and anxiety, NEU members have turned to their union. They have sought advice, information, protection, and their union has been there for them. Our focus has been to follow the science and to advocate for good education policy based on that science. We released last year an international survey of the evidence on COVID and education. We wanted to follow the science, to understand what it said, and to be honest and open with our members, with the parents, with their parents, and with the nation. The calls that we have made have been made on the basis of that science. We have always been clear. Our concern about schools was never that children would become very ill with COVID, but always about schools as vectors of transmission to our members and out into the community, to parents and grandparents. And time again, we have been proved right. We were right to argue for schools and colleges to close for most pupils last March. We were right then to say that CEV and CV staff should make their contribution working from home, and the delegate who said that we have saved lives is quite right. We were right then also to ask other staff to be in schools and colleges, working on those rotas to support the key worker and vulnerable children so that our NHS could carry on. We were right to argue, along with SAGE, that there should have been a 2-week autumn half-term as a circuit breaker, and then with secondary schools operating on a rota basis. If the government had listened to us, there would have been less deaths and there would have been less disruption to education. When the government ignored us, we were right to argue that schools should have been included in the November lockdown to suppress transmission rates from schools into the community. We were right to argue that schools in Greenwich should be allowed to close the week before Christmas because of the new variant and because of those soaring transmission rates.
We were right to argue that primary schools should not reopen on the 4th of January in the middle of a pandemic, with infection and hospitalisation rates soaring, and with a new variant which was known to be up to 50% more transmissible. Our Zoom meeting on the 3rd of January had 400,000 members and members on the public online. It's the biggest trade union virtual meeting that's ever taken place. Gavin Williamson had decreed that primary schools would reopen, come what may. Blind to the gravity and the danger of the situation, he kept on carrying on, knowing that it was unsafe to fully open schools. Like King Canute, he stood on the shores of ignorance, telling education professionals that it was safe to go back. It was not. And the fact that at least 25% of primary members signed the Section 44 letters asserting their right to work in an environment which was not an immediate danger to their health shows that Gavin Williamson was not believed when he said it was safe to return. It was a statement that Boris Johnson contradicted the very next day at 8 o'clock on 4th of January when he said that unfortunately schools were acting as vectors of for COVID transmission. We were also right to argue that the government needed to adopt our education recovery plan. If it had done so, transmission rates in schools would have been reduced and pupils would have spent less time out of school in home learning. We were right to argue that the government needed a plan B for GCSE, A-level and vocational exams. And if the government had listened to us, teachers and lecturers would not now be in the position where they learned just 2 days before the end of the spring term what they needed to know to provide the most accurate grades for their pupils.
And conference, because we and you made the right choices and stood up for the rights of our members and for their pupils and their communities, the NEU, our union, has gained a huge reputation during the pandemic. Because the National Education Union could be relied upon to speak truth to power, we have grown our membership, our power and our influence as a trades union. We have seen a huge surge in membership. We are 35,000 stronger than this time last year. And we want to welcome all those new members to our union, be they teachers, support staff, or school leaders in England, Wales, or Northern Ireland. We want to work with them and with our existing members to now improve both the working lives and the education of the children and young people they teach and support. We have strengthened the union by increasing our school and college rep density, and this is so powerful for our members. 78% of our secondary members now work in a school or a college with the rep. Percentage not quite as high for primary members, but much improved at 58%. And do you know 72% of those new reps are women? 38% are aged under 35. 7% of the new reps are black compared to 3% pre-COVID. And we recruited over 200 black reps after the Black Lives Matter Zoom with Jesse Jackson. That data is important. It allows us to benchmark where we are building the union from the base. But what's more important is what that data means. For the NEU, it means that we're becoming, in schools and colleges, more representative of our membership. Young women stepping up and taking on the responsibility of being a rep, organising in new ways, using those WhatsApp groups to communicate with their members and across their MAT or local authority with other reps. And they are sharing their successes and their challenges, helping each other, supporting each other, and winning safety in their workplace. And now we want to win more. We want to thank all those members who've stepped up and volunteered to be workplace reps, COVID reps, health and safety reps. The strength of the union is their strength.
And we must be there for them post-COVID. Conference, we cannot unthinkingly go back to past ways of doing things. We must recognise that there is a new normal of new and successful ways of working in the union, and we must consider what we want to keep doing differently. Whilst we will all welcome, when it comes, the return to in-person meetings in the union at branch and district, at executive level, at conference and in CPD events, in the regional councils and so much more, we must not forget that for many of our members, these events are just not accessible because they have caring responsibilities. 76% of our membership are women. Many of them have caring responsibilities. So we have some pressing questions to think about. For example, why can't we make Zoom available for all meetings so that members can attend either in person or remotely, which may be far easier for women with childcare in the evening or at the weekend? And with blended attendance, how are we going to structure our meetings so that they are welcoming and interesting to all members? Procedures are important, but we must remember that the procedures are there to serve the purpose of the union, and that purpose must be to engage, to empower, and to energise our members so that they can organise collectively to make their own working lives better. Throughout the COVID crisis, our members have been remarkable in their commitment to their pupils, remarkable in their dedication to them, turning to new technologies to teach remotely, remarkable in their compassion for their most vulnerable pupils, feeding them and making sure they were safe, and remarkable in their connection with their union.
Now, in his remit letter to the STRB, Gavin Williamson acknowledged that school teachers and leaders had made a huge contribution to the nation's efforts in responding to the unprecedented challenges arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. He praised their extraordinary dedication. He then went on to argue that their pay should be cut. Gavin, don't think we haven't noticed. We have. Words are cheap, and you want teachers and lecturers on the cheap. You want teaching assistants on the cheap. You want supply teachers on the cheap. We're not fooled by your talk of a pay pause. Let's call it out for what it is, Gavin. It's a pay cut for the professionals who you relied upon to educate the nation's pupils remotely, who with no CPD completely transformed their practice using new technology to communicate with pupils in their homes. Our president, Robin Bevan, calls this the biggest and most successful IT infrastructure project ever accomplished in the United Kingdom. And he's right. You did that. A pay cut for the teachers who you, Gavin Williamson, are relying on to support education recovery throughout the next year and beyond, so that children and young people are supported to fulfill their potential in life. And the continuation of low pay, term time only contracts for support staff who did so much in the pandemic to keep in touch with pupils, to keep them safe and fed and connected with their school. We're going to make the case for pay in England, in Wales, and in Northern Ireland. In Wales and Northern Ireland, we have some politicians who listen more than Gavin. But we don't just need politicians who will listen. We need politicians who will act.
There is no justice in these pay cuts. We know the truth when we see it, and the truth is this, that this government was fulsome in its praise of the public sector, for nurses and doctors, for teachers and leaders when it was desperate. But when things get back to a new normal, because of nurses and doctors and teachers and lecturers, it reverts to type. We see you, Boris Johnson. We see you, Gavin Williamson, and we don't like what we see. We don't like what we see when it comes to this government's track record on child poverty either. Of course, we knew about child poverty before the pandemic, but COVID has revealed for all to see the extent and severity of child poverty in the UK. The survey of NEU members on the poverty of so many of their pupils tells a shocking story. What they have seen in their remote lessons, getting glimpses into their pupils' homes, has been shocking. Children living in damp, overcrowded accommodation with nowhere quiet to work. Children who have no food in the house. All those Tory MPs who castigated teachers in the first wave of the pandemic about the amount and quality of remote learning didn't mention the shocking fact that, according to Ofcom, between 1 million and 1.8 million children live in homes without internet access or without laptops or other IT devices, essential to learn remotely. And if we're honest, essential to live fulfilled lives as citizens in the 21st century. Children are going to find it so much more difficult to learn if their lives are blighted by inequality and insecurity. And it should be understood by everyone, even those Tory MPs who voted against giving poor children free school meals in the holidays, that children cannot learn if they are hungry. And if they are hugely stressed because they do not know whether they will be hungry again soon. If they are living in crowded, damp accommodation with nowhere quiet to learn, a huge problem for so many children in the pandemic. If they are trying to do remote learning on their mother's phone because a household is not connected to the internet, or if they don't have laptops.
So what this COVID pandemic has exposed is the reality that schools and colleges are far more than institutions where children are educated. One of the most brutal effects of austerity has been that so much of the public realm which children and their families relied upon has disappeared. Youth centres closed, Sure Start centres closed, libraries closed, benefits cut or arbitrarily terminated. As these public services have been decimated, so schools and colleges have stepped into the breach, feeding children and clothing them, becoming counsellors, helping parents who can't fill in their benefit forms. Anne Longfield talked about this in her final speech as Children's Commissioner. She said, seeing head teachers walking around their communities, handing out food parcels to lockdown children, not just to make sure the children are fed, but because it was the only way to see them, to make sure they were okay. That has been incredibly moving. And she added, if the pandemic has taught us one thing, it's the fundamental role that schools play in vulnerable children's lives, way beyond teaching. And so it is entirely right that this year's Fred Anand Jarvis Award has gone to Marcus Rashford, who has been such an ambassador for the fundamental right of all children to have enough to eat. And we want to commend him here and thank him again for the work he's done and continues to do to stand up for the children that the Conservatives would want us to forget and whose policies make these children's lives even harder. If Boris Johnson means what he says about wanting to level up, he would focus on one important thing. He would make it his mission, his government's mission, to eradicate child poverty, which is the biggest cause of unequal outcomes in our education system. 40% of the education attainment gap between rich and poor children is set in stone before they start school. Other countries have attacked child poverty. Like zero COVID, if we want to increase the life chances of all children, we must stop them living nervous, anxious, narrow lives where they don't know beyond their school dinner where the next meal will come from.
Teachers, leaders and support staff have gone beyond the extra mile in this pandemic. They have stepped into the wasteland of public services decimated by austerity. They've rolled up their sleeves and they've worked to protect the most vulnerable. They are heroes and they should be treated as heroes, as should all our other key workers. But as the return to school becomes the new normal, it is remarkable how quickly the new normal becomes the bad old days. Workload went through the roof for teachers and leaders with remote learning. You would have hoped now for at least a modicum of relief. But now we are getting back to in-person teaching and learning. In too many schools and colleges, the bad old days are back. With the threat of Ofsted inspections looming, some leaders, fearful of the inspectors, reinstate in-school accountability practices which work only to exhaust teachers, not to improve the quality of their teaching or their pupils' learning. So now we are seeing the re-emergence of lesson observations and book scrutiny and curriculum audits, all of which are built on mistrust and all of which denigrate our members' professionalism. What should be a collegiate conversation becomes dictation. And what gets diminished and destroyed in this? Teacher professionals, autonomy and efficacy. The OECD says the essence of professionalism is informed choice and autonomy, the ability to use your experience and knowledge to make informed judgments. Now, the stats I'm going to use now are from the 2018 Teaching and Learning International Surveys, TALIS surveys, run by the OECD. And I'm afraid that there are no figures for Wales and Northern Ireland because those nations did not take part in TALIS. England has now pulled out of the TALIS survey as well, and we were opposed to this, but we think that the survey results were so worrying that the government didn't want any more bad news. So what does TALIS tell us? What does this international survey tell us? Well, the most startling and shocking finding is that England comes top of the OECD league table when it comes to teacher stress. 38% of teachers in England reported that they felt a lot of stress in their work, when the OECD average for teachers feeling a lot of stress is 18%, less than half the figure in England. Now, that's shocking, isn't it? But I bet it's what you already know from your own experience. Now, teachers don't mind working hard. The profession already works the most unpaid overtime of any profession, with working out weeks regularly exceeding 50 hours, nearly 55 hours for leaders. But teachers do mind. They mind very much being told what to do and spending hours and hours of wasted time filling in forms, inputting data and marking. Teachers come in the top of the marking league table across the OECD, and other countries are investing far more in other forms of assessment in addition to marking. They are focusing on conversations between pupils and teachers, which allow for much more detailed and focused feedback. Nearly 40% of teachers in England feel that they do not have enough control over their practice. They are not able, they feel, to make professional decisions about the content of their lessons. Across the OECD, 81% of teachers feel they do have control of their practice. So, conference, what is it that we are doing wrong in this country to make teachers feel so lacking in professional empowerment and judgment? What are we doing in this country to make leaders feel so ground down? Why do they feel so strongly that the DfE is a hindrance rather than a help to their work? Why do leaders feel so unsupported by the government, despite their heroic efforts to educate children, to care for them, to run a test, track and trace programme in their schools and colleges? How is it that this government could have got this pandemic so badly wrong when it came to education? How is it that the DfE resorted to multiple versions of its guidance, leaving leaders desperately trying to decipher what had changed between one version and the next, as if they did not have enough to do as it was? Conference, we get wearily resigned to the incompetence of our government, but international comparisons tell us something new. What they tell us is it doesn't need to be like this, and in other high-performing education nations, it is not like this. Conference, it does not have to be this way.
So we, the National Education Union, are going to do something about it. We intend to use our new strength, our new technology, to fight for teacher professionalism and control. We're going to take the motion 5 on workload passed at this conference and give our reps the tools to bargain for good work in schools and colleges, MATs and local authorities. Work that empowers teachers, educates their pupils and raises standards of education. We're going to take motion 20, building the union in each education workplace. We're going to make it a reality so that the NEU is able to make a difference, as the motion directs us, in our members' daily working lives. And we're going to do this by supporting our reps nationally, so that in school after school, we negotiate on the professional issues which are at the centre of our members' working lives: pedagogy, the curriculum, assessment, in-school accountability and CPD, and then school by school, college by college, mat by mat, give our reps and members the confidence to assert their rights as professionals, their right to good work, their right to have their valuable time valued, their right to be listened to as a professional, their right to have their knowledge and experience respected. We'll encourage them to share their experiences of winning steps, no matter how small, so that we turn the conversation. Yes, we can do something. We can make some ground. And we will make this case nationally to government and to employer bodies. We will make it nationally to parents and the public. We will engage with every section and sector of our union to ensure this work is strengthened through the perspectives of leaders, support staff, college staff, supply members, and across all of our diverse equality strands. When we work together, we can achieve so much. Now, we aren't looking for changes on teacher workload, which transfer that workload to existing support staff who are already overworked and underpaid. Nor are we looking for changes which move workload up to school leaders. Instead, we want more funding for schools, and we want to arrange teacher workload the way other countries do, where teachers don't have to spend so much time simply producing documents which evidence what they've already done. And we will do this not just for our members, although that is a very good thing to do, but for the children and young people they teach, because they deserve teachers who are not exhausted. They deserve teachers who are able to stay in the profession, not leave in droves within 5 years. They deserve an education system which is not fatally undermined by teacher shortages and by experienced teachers leaving in despair, leaving a job that they could love because they just cannot stand the stress anymore. We will continue to campaign, as motion 26 demands, on child poverty. And we will build on our hugely successful Help a Child to Learn campaign with the Daily Mirror, providing over £1 million of stationery and learning aids to children who, when asked in their homes by their teacher on Zoom to get a pen and paper to write with, had neither in their house. We're going to work with the Daily Mirror and others and launch a pledge for every politician to hold them to account for the action they take on child poverty. We're going to continue to work towards a better, more inclusive education system for disabled children through our work on SEND and mental health support, as motion 34 asks us, and for an education system that takes on the challenge of race, as motion 24 suggests. We won't be phased by reports which say that racism doesn't exist or doesn't matter in our education system. We say to Boris Johnson and to the government, it is true that black children often face two obstacles, one racism, the other poverty. But far from using that to say that racism doesn't matter, as the Sewell report does, this truth should be a clarion call for you, Prime Minister, to act on both racism and poverty. But currently, you are failing on both. We will challenge sexism and gender stereotypes in schools, building on the groundbreaking work we've already done with our Sexism It's Everywhere report and our CPD materials. Conference yesterday, you passed a motion calling for a moratorium on exclusions. We want to see root and branch reform of our education system and a huge reduction in exclusions, particularly a reduction in the exclusion of black boys who are six times more likely than their white peers to be excluded in some areas. This is a running sore in our education system and it needs to be healed.
But conference, we also believe that you do not intend that girls who have been raped in schools and colleges, girls who have been sexually harassed in schools and colleges, will be required to remain in the classroom or walk down a crowded corridor with the perpetrator of that rape or that sexual harassment. As Kevin said, the NEU's own report, It's Just About Everywhere, showed how routine is the sexual abuse and harassment of girls in schools and college. The Everyone's Invited website, with thousands of testimonies from girls and young women, showed the shocking extent of sexual harassment and sexual violence perpetrated against girls and young women in schools and colleges and universities. I have read the testimonies. They are heartbreaking and shaming. And in those cases, and in cases where teachers and support staff are physically attacked while doing their job, we believe that the sanction of exclusion must still be available if that is the correct sanction to keep the victims safe and to keep boys who are viciously bullied or attacked safe. What is important, surely, is that no child or young person is ever excluded from education. If a school or a college ceases to be the best place for that young person, then the alternative provision provided for them must be excellent, must enable them to progress in their education and in their personal and social development, and must enable them to be reintegrated into mainstream education as soon as is possible. Conference, that is the interpretation that we will use. Conference, schools and colleges need to be better places for all our pupils. The NEU's Independent Commission on Assessment, looking at alternatives to the secondary school route march through exams, will report later this year. And we will publicise the findings of this commission and be a leading player in the debate, which is raging now about GCSE and A-levels and their future. COVID has revealed to parents just how inappropriate is the national curriculum, which is not powerful knowledge, but a route march through rote learning. It is notable that fundamental questions are now being asked by so many, including the previous Conservative Secretary of State for Education, Kenneth Baker, and by Tory MPs about the curriculum and its assessment. For example, what is the purpose of GCSEs when students remain in education and training until they're 18? Why do we put our young people through so many exams? What does this pressure do to their attitude to learning? Why don't we plan for and prepare for skills development? The NEU Commission on Assessment is looking at all these key questions, and so are many other groups. Conference, the National Education Union showed in a crisis just how powerful we are when we work together. If the NEU was not a household name before the pandemic, it is now. Just look at our reach. We increased our Facebook page from 50,000 to 150,000 followers this year. And we now have the biggest social media presence of any union in the UK. We can use that reach to make the case for education in so many other areas, building our campaign on funding for the much needed reform of primary school assessment and an end to SATs and baseline tests. And if there is one lie that has been nailed, it is this one, that schools and colleges are solely academic institutions with one purpose. Of course, the central purpose of schools and colleges is education, teaching and learning, but they are so much more, and how much more they have shown this year. We will use this media reach to inform and educate. We will use it to give confidence to our members and to our reps, confidence in the strength of the National Education Union, confidence in our evidence-informed policies and campaigns, confidence in their ability to exercise their professional judgment, confidence that they have made the right to make choices about the work that they do, work which should be empowering and fulfilling and energizing, confidence that it should be good work, confidence that they have the right to have reasonable working hours, which give them time for their family and for friends, for resting and relaxation, confidence that they have the right to be paid properly for the work they do. And in supporting our members developing this confidence, our union will be built anew in each school and each college. We, you, conference, we are the NEU. And conference, there is power in the union.
Thank you very much indeed, Mary and Kevin. Your words will resonate powerfully, not just through and beyond the conference Zoom, but I am sure throughout schools, colleges, and the education workforce and beyond. Conference, we are just about to enter our lunch break, but I want to just for a moment ask for your continued attention. Kevin started his speech by referencing the challenges of COVID. I am not alone. In having lost family members in the last year. My children have lost their grandparents, one to COVID, prematurely, an early death. It has been a year when we have lost friends and family. Brothers have lost sisters, sisters, brothers, children, parents, and grandparents. And it is within our union's humanity to mark those losses, to call to mind the friends, to call to mind those who have been with us in the union, long-standing representatives and campaigners, members of staff in our schools. I had intended to bring this moment of reflection at the end of conference, partly because it's personal. But many of you will have seen the news that Prince Philip has passed away in the last hour. I wouldn't necessarily take conference's time on that alone, but I do want to just mark one particular aspect of the Duke of Edinburgh's legacy that is considerable. One of the things I have most missed in the last year is the opportunity to take students in year 10 from my school away camping for weekends, hiking in the countryside. They're never terribly good at finding their routes, and half the fun is actually finding out where they end up when they were meant to be somewhere else. But those weekends and opportunities to serve through the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme have transformed lives, young lives, given opportunities, given adventure. And that aspect of the Prince Philip's legacy is something that we should pay due respect to. Conference, I don't ask you to think just of that. I ask you just to join me for a brief moment of quiet reflection, remembering all those friends, family, and campaigners who we have said goodbye to in the last year. Thank you very much. And conference, we resume at 1:15 after our lunch break. Thank you. Good afternoon, conference, and welcome back to this, the final session of the National Education Union's annual conference. And thank you once again, delegates, for your attention, your participation, and all the work that you're doing to spread the messages of the work of our union out beyond this conference hall, and indeed out beyond the places where you are joining us from. We start this afternoon with our international section, and as we begin that, I would like to just pay open and warm tribute to delegates who are joining us online from overseas. We invited many of our sister unions and federations, and we have delegates listening in as observers from Australia, from Colombia, from across the European Union, from Gambia, Germany, Ghana, Kenya, the Netherlands, Norway, Palestine, South Africa, Turkey, and Uganda. And you all are very welcome, and we share with you in your challenges and struggles, often unique to individual countries, but often also very much shared. We're going to be moving to motion 36. I do have a request that conference you accept an interchange between the proposer and seconder, that Croydon move and Camden second. I am not anticipating objection to that. So with your consent implicitly assumed, conference, I'm going to call on Dave Winters of Croydon to propose the first international motion on Venezuela, and then Gerald Clark of Camden to second. We do have an amendment to this motion, which is due to be proposed by Mark Osborne of Southwark and seconded by Freddie Vanson of Southwark. And just checking my speaker list, we do have speakers against Amendment 1, and indeed we do have speakers against Amendment 2, should we get there. And indeed, we have a speaker against the main motion. So that gives you conference an indication of the number of speakers we may need to call. Thank you for your patience with that introduction. Dave Winters, Dave, if you're available, we would love to see you on the screen.
Gracias, Presidente. My apologies for that technical glitch. I've been put forward by the Croydon district to move this motion on Venezuela, not only because I have an interest in political events in Latin America, but because I have worked in and traveled extensively in that country. Moreover, I have maintained contact with teachers and trade unionists with whom I met. Initially, I led a British Council project in schools in Caracas. The project was spread over a 5-year period during the Chavez era. It involved developing school self-evaluation systems pioneered by the NUT. My involvement with Venezuelan schools provided me with the opportunity to witness the great strides forward in education. I learned a great deal about the initiatives, the missions aimed at improving the educational opportunities for children, young people, and adults. The most undereducated, neglected, and marginalized citizens were given access to the educational opportunities denied them in the past. The educational initiatives were part of a wider program tackling social injustice, poverty, poor housing, and health provision. Over 30 programs in all. These anti-poverty and social welfare programs were financed largely by revenue from the nation's most valuable natural resource, oil. Shortly after the end of my involvement in the educational project, I revisited Venezuela as a member of a British trade union delegation. This broadened my knowledge and awareness of the impact of the policies of the Chavez-led government. The gains made have regrettably been reversed as a result of the widely condemned boycott and other subversive tactics of the US government. Sweeping illegal sanctions have crippled the oil industry, which provided the revenue to support the social programs that I have mentioned. it has caused widespread misery and hardship among the poor. The activities of the US government and the fifth columnists it finances within Venezuela have created shortages of essential materials, including foodstuff and medical supplies and equipment. Like every trade union in the UK, the NEU must continue to stand up for Venezuela. We must reaffirm our support for the Bolivarian revolution in the face of US-led aggressive measures. We need to counteract, not accept, all the propaganda directed against Venezuela. Propaganda that seeks to undermine democracy and the self-determination of an independent nation. Let this union continue our support for the Venezuelan people and their legitimate government at a time of exceptional challenge. Unwavering, steadfast, resolute support is needed. The motion signposts how we might take practical steps to extend our support as a union. Colleagues, I wish to inform you and the President that I do not accept Amendment 1 and that I will use my right of reply to speak against this amendment when it is moved and seconded. President, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you for clarity on when you wish to exercise your right of reply. That is appreciated. And so I now call Gerald Clark of Camden to second motion 36. Thank you, Gerald.
President Conference, thank you. It's a pleasure to be seconding this amendment today instead of our Camden delegate Orlando Hill, who sadly can't be with conference today. I think it's a particular pleasure because this is the half hour of conference where we can be really outward looking. And I think it's important that we have the opportunity to discuss an international motion. I'm pleased to be doing this one. Like many others, my family and I have been watching some TV series during the last successive lockdowns. We've been watching Richard Ayoade's Travel Man. If you haven't seen it, he takes a celebrity to a foreign city for 48 hours. And at some point, he always says, "We're here, but should we have come?" I think it's a relevant question to ask about this motion. We're here, but should we have come? Or why have we come, Richard? I'm afraid that I think Venezuela is another example of something for which there's a popular narrative about which we don't show enough critical thinking, looking for the facts behind the glib headlines. The average British media outlet casts Venezuela's leader Maduro as someone who's corrupt, has held on to power through a lack of democracy, and starved his own people. I'm sure that most of our members appreciate that, and I think there are many reasons, I'm not sure that most of our members appreciate that, and there are many reasons why I think we as a union should be doing a bit more for the people and for the teachers and children of Venezuela. So in Richard Ayoade fashion, some quick facts about Venezuela. In Venezuela, there are 17 education trade unions, 9 of which have agreements with the government, and some of which have agreements with the opposition. Investment in education between 2002 and 2014 went from 2.5% of GDP to 10% of GDP. Venezuela has been free of illiteracy since October 2005. Public education is still free despite the US blockade. 93% of Venezuelan children are in school, and tablets are provided to students at all levels free of charge. The government has a house building program continued despite the pandemic and the US blockade, which has seen them build 3.5 million houses in the last few years, with the aim of having a home for every citizen, which means no homeless adults or children and work for many skilled and unskilled laborers. These, colleagues, are statistics that I think most of us would be jealous of, and yet we're a strong and rich country compared to Venezuela. They may live in circumstances different to ours, but there's much to admire and much that we can learn from them as trade unionists and as educationalists, which is why it gives me pleasure to second this motion, encouraging strong links with SINAFUM, I'm not sure if that's how they pronounce their acronym, the Venezuela Teachers Union. Thank you, Conference, I second.
Thank you very much, Gerald. And we pass from the motion to the First Amendment. We're looking to call Mark Osborne to speak first, and then Freddie Vanson to second that motion. And just checking my paperwork, I will then be calling the first speaker against Amendment 36.1, Anne Surratt from West Sussex. Thank you very much. Mark, thank you for your patience. You have your 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Conference. This isn't an add amendment. It deletes nothing from the motion. The problem with the motion as we see it, as it stands, it's one-sided. Now, I don't dispute that the US has been bullying Venezuela. It has, and that's wrong. And we're not aiming to remove the criticism of US sanctions. That remains, and that's right to remain. However, what we want to do is rebalance the motion, because in actual fact, inside Venezuela, there is an awful lot of repression directed at the trade unions and trade unionists by the state and by the Venezuelan bosses. And we want the union to make a statement in defense of Venezuelan trade unionists. You would have thought that that would be completely uncontentious, but apparently not. I noticed that lots of people from around the world are listening to our discussions, and I hope this amendment is passed by a long, long way, a big majority, or we will embarrass our union in front of these foreign delegates. So if you vote against the amendment, you're voting to remain silent as trade unionists are attacked and jailed in Venezuela. Picket lines are broken up, and advocates of things that we take for granted in our union are repressed. So the amendment notes the case of a particular trade unionist, Yudis Giro, who was arrested by military intelligence, not by police, by military intelligence in mid-November 2020. He has absurdly been accused of terrorism and of leaking information to the media. Now, let me tell you a bit about Giro. Giro is a leader of the 100,000 strong oil workers union in a strategic industry in Venezuela. Perhaps he's the most important part of Venezuela's trade union movement. Now, his real crime is speaking out about the corruption and mismanagement in the oil industry. Now, every year, Transparency International produces a list of countries ordered in a corruption index. Venezuela comes in at 176th out of 180 countries. In other words, it's behind Putin's Russia, Iraq. There's a lot of corruption there. It's not just made up by American politicians. And in the oil industry, corruption is endemic. And don't let anybody tell you it's the Americans' fault. The people that are stealing money, that are embezzling money in the oil industry, do so because they're greedy, not because the State Department told them to do so. They get away with it because they have political protection, and they take money away from literacy and health schemes that would help the poor and the needy and the working class. And Giro's crime is to speak out clearly against corruption. It was the right thing to do, and we should defend him. He's doing what we would do, or what we would be expected to do in similar circumstances. So anybody who wants to dismiss the Venezuelan trade unionists normally use a particular tool. They will demagogically claim that they're pro-American and American stooges, and they'll shrug and say, well, what do you expect from such people? Now, I've chosen Giro particularly, well, partly at least, because he's not open to that accusation at all in any sense. Giro is, in fact, a member of the ruling party. He's a card-carrying supporter of the Maduro government, and he has been for 20 years, right? And yet he's been accused of terrorism. It's a ridiculous charge. So his crime is to stand up against management and for workers' rights. And yet even Giro has been arrested, which tells you something about the scale and breadth and depth of repression against trade unionists in Venezuela. And we should say that we're against it. The general point is this, is that we should make solidarity with trade unions and trade unionists across the world, everywhere, right? Trade union rights aren't just for Croydon and Camden, they're for us too. And only us. They're for workers across Europe and the West and right across the world. If union rights are good for us, they're good for Venezuelan workers too. Let's speak up for them and call out repression against the trade unions everywhere, no matter who is responsible for that repression. Conference, please pass this
Thank you very much, Marco. Just fading out the sound as you just go over your time limit there. And we move on to Freddie Vanson. Freddie is going to be seconding this amendment. And just as we bring Freddie to the screen, I found the piece of paper that reminded me I was meant to say thank you to Karen Callow for the fabulous cartoon that was up on your screens at the beginning of the afternoon session. I missed my piece of paper. So Karen, thank you. And Freddie, when you're ready, you have your 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Big up Robin and everyone behind the scenes working so hard to make things run so smoothly. I'm sorry for your loss, Robin, and all those who've experienced tragedy as a result of COVID-19. This is my first time speaking at conference. I wanted to start by saying I was extremely disappointed and think it's a disgrace that the Equality Conference motions were not given enough time. I'm London born and raised, proud to have lived with the world on my doorstep. And for that reason, I've always had a strong love for global issues, not to think small-minded. Think global, act local. I'm proud that the NEU stands in solidarity with our brothers and sisters around the world. I went on the delegation to Palestine a couple of years ago. Some comrades of mine went to Cuba and Srebrenica with delegations too. I'm proud to have gone on the NEU delegation to care for Calais to support refugees. When Hugo Chavez was elected president of Venezuela, the first democratically elected president, there was a beacon of hope for a new 21st century form of socialism, an alternative to aggressive neoliberal, neo-colonial US capitalism promoted throughout the Americas. Of course, the US has done everything it can to destabilize the Venezuelan economy and smash Chavez's fifth Bolivarian revolution, including a US-backed coup in 2002. Just watch the documentary, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. When Chavez died in 2013, the poorest and most vulnerable people in Venezuela were heartbroken. Their president had educated their children, had redistributed wealth. What has followed his death has been an onslaught of sanctions, embargoes, and blockades by the USA in contravention of international law. Many of our fellow trade union activists around the world, particularly in Venezuela, are victims of repression, intimidation, arrest, and imprisonment, including this man, Udos Girot, the leader of the oil union. When Venezuela, the fourth largest oil producer in the world, I wonder why they came after him. Imagine Kevin and Mary being arrested and imprisoned by our government. We need to stand shoulder to shoulder with these comrades, voice our outrage, let them know they are not alone, they are heard and supported, that we will campaign for their release and for their right to unionize. International solidarity work is vital. As the famous poem, Not My Business by Nee Azugri states, they picked up a shanty one morning, beat him softly like clay and stuffed him down the belly of a waiting jeep. What business of mine is it, so long as they don't take the yam from my savoring mouth? They came one night, booted the whole house awake and dragged Udos Girot out, then off to a lengthy absence. What business of mine is it, so long as they don't take the oil from our petrol guzzling car? An injury to one is an injury to all. The people united will never be defeated. Viva Hugo Chavez, viva Venezuela. I second Amendment 36.1.
Thank you very much indeed, Freddie. And we have a speaker against Amendment 36.1. First speaker must be called, and that is Anne Surratt of West Sussex, speaking against the amendment. Thank you, Anne.
President Conference, of course, none of us could possibly support the interference of any government in the affairs of a trades union or the spurious arrest of trades union officers. However, Conference should not confuse independent trades unionism with the illegal acts that attempt to sabotage an economy already under a foreign blockade and to destabilise and overthrow a democratically elected government. Would any of us support that? Before we ask the union to publicly condemn the repression of independent trades unions in Venezuela, we need to be very sure of the facts and that the alleged repression has actually taken place. Ever since Hugo Chavez came to power, and now under the Maduro government, the oil industry, as the most important in the world, has been subject to a series of attacks and sabotage in an effort by far-right sectors with US support to destabilise the country as part of their endless attempts to overthrow the democratically elected government. They rely on internal support from workers who are willing to provide confidential information and even conduct acts of sabotage, including bombings themselves, in return for payment. Apart from the vague mention of reports, the amendment specifically refers to one Eudes Girot. Girot was arrested and charged with organised criminal association and with leaking confidential information about the state oil company. One of Girot's supporters is a former oil minister and president of the state oil company, Rafael Ramirez, also previously a card-carrying member of the ruling party. The Panama Papers revealed compromising information about Mr. Ramirez and his cousin, Diego Salazar, who was arrested. The accusations against Ramirez include running an embezzlement scheme out of the state oil company's Austria-based oil marketing bureau, which cost Venezuela's coffers $4.8 billion US. Ramirez and Salazar were likewise accused of siphoning off 4.2 billion euros worth of state oil funds through a bank in Andorra. Ramirez is believed to be living in Italy after flouting a call for him to return to Venezuela for questioning. An Interpol red alert has been issued. Eudes Hirot is a direct link between Ramirez and the internal conspiracy in the state oil company. He has a very expensive house and all his children live in the United States. This is the context against which Hirot has been arrested. It is nothing to do with his trade union activities. Conference, I urge you to reject this amendment and not fall prey to the fraudulent propaganda of the US and its neo-colonialist supporters.
Thank you very much indeed, Anne. And I'm just looking at the list of speakers on Amendment 36.1, but we do have Standing Order 20. So, Conference, your first opportunity this afternoon to indicate whether you wish to hear any more speakers or whether you wish to move to the vote on 36.1. Conference, if you vote in favour of Standing Order 20, you are saying that we will move to the vote. If you vote against, then we will hear more speakers. I am mindful that we've already had an indication that Dave Winters will be exercising his right of reply at this point of the process, if we're not hearing any more speakers. And Conference, many of you did want to hear from more speakers, 200, but 538 indicated that you wanted to proceed to the vote. So at this point, I'm inviting Dave Winters to exercise his right of reply. And thank you, Dave, for letting me know in advance. Just bringing Dave onto the screen.
Thanks, President. When I read this Amendment 1, I was both surprised and alarmed by its contents. Its contents indeed needs to be treated seriously. It's highly critical, and there was an obvious need to carry out a check. And who better to go to than Venezuelan trade unionists? Now, Anne has eloquently refuted the support that this amendment gives to the leader of the trade union involved with oil production in Venezuela. I want to concentrate on a response that I received from the trade union to which we in the motion are committed to making links with. I received from them a very interesting reply. It made 4 points. Firstly, I was told that in Venezuela, there is full trade union freedom. In the year 2000, for example, there were approximately 1,000 trade unions. Today, there's more than 3,000. Secondly, 17 of the educational sector unions are affiliated to our equivalent of the TUC. 9 of those unions are aligned with the national government. 8 of those educational unions are aligned with the opposition parties. Conference, when I was in Venezuela, I saw the power of the right-wing elements within that country. The teachers' union rejects the allegation that the so-called independent trade unions are repressed. 2002, industry supported, in 2002, industries within the sector, employees within the sector supported the coup in 2002. There was an oil lockout, which was supported by some of the workers, but it did not result in any arrests or detention. The TUC equivalent in Venezuela All unions, all so-called independent unions included, are invited, are guaranteed an opportunity to speak. The truth of the matter is, elements in Venezuela, elements who are intent on bringing about regime, are being supported by this amendment, which will be, of course, warmly welcomed in Washington, in the Trump administration, in the Trump.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave. We just lost you as your time elapsed. And now we move to the votes, please, on Amendment 36.1. That was Dave's right of reply to Amendment 36.1. And the amendment has been lost. 454 of you voting against and 252 voting for. So Amendment 36.1 is lost. Standing Order 21 has been invoked. This time I'll get it in the right order. Thank you for your patience earlier today when I misinterpreted that one. Standing Order 21, which is a conference, your request to the main motion or continue to Amendment 36.2. So, Mike, if we can load in the procedural motion. If you vote for, we will go back to the main motion. If you vote against, we will proceed to hear Amendment 36.2. And we're just waiting for that vote to come in. Overwhelming majority of you voted for, so we revert to the main motion. I have to say, if we had gone on to Amendment 36.2, as I think many of you realise, we would have been out of time, but I do have time within the half an hour allocated to call the one speaker against, which is Peter Barrow from Bury. Speaking against, if you can raise your hand. Fabulous, thank you, Peter. You have got a maximum of 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, President and Conference. So I'm against this motion entirely. Maduro's administration grossly mismanages the Venezuelan economy, as has the Venezuelan government the entire time since the revolution. They crush the opposition, they jail and exile critics and use lethal force against anti-government protesters. He's been described as a dictator, Maduro, by the Organization of American States, which have also reported crimes against humanity, which have been committed during his presidency. According to estimations by the United Nations, under Maduro's administration, more than 9,000 people have been subject to extrajudicial killings, and more than 4 million Venezuelans have been forced to flee the country. The crisis has been created by the Venezuelan government over a number of years. It's not created by any sanctions from the US, like the motion implies. The sanctions are vital in order to condemn the oppressive nature of Venezuelan society. The crisis has affected the life of the average Venezuelan on all levels. By 2017, hunger had escalated in Venezuela to the point where almost 75% of the population had lost an average of 8 kilograms in weight, that's 19 pounds, and more than half of Venezuelans did not have enough income to meet their basic food needs. Reuters reported that a UN report estimated in March 2019 that 94% of Venezuelans lived in poverty and more than 10% of Venezuelans have left their country. 25% of Venezuelans need some form of humanitarian assistance. It also leads the world in murder rates, being the third most violent country in the world. In addition, abortion is illegal in Venezuela, and more women present with complications from clandestine abortions, and there's a shortage of contraception. When Obama issued Executive Order 13692 in 2015, that targeted individuals. It did not target the Venezuelan people. These are people that were involved in arbitrary arrest and detention of anti-government protesters. Human Rights Watch and Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health published a joint report noting that no sanctions did target the Venezuelan economy. They specifically targeted individuals and did not worsen the situation, even in 2019, for the ordinary Venezuelan. Finally, it's against the views of the Venezuelan people. In 2017, a survey said that they held the former presidents of Venezuela responsible for this crisis, not the US.
Thank you very much, Peter. And conference, there is a speaker who wishes to speak for this motion, but I am going to exercise my rights under Standing Order 19 to determine that further debate is not necessary. And I am going to take us straight to the vote on motion 36, unamended. So motion 36 is now going to be voted on. So in a moment, I'm going to be calling John Rediford from Somerset to propose the urgent motion, Nadia Thornton of Bristol to second, and we do have an amendment. I'm just checking how many amendments we've got. We've got 2 amendments. I think we have the Venezuela motion has been passed, 511 votes against 196 with 141 abstentions. Conference, thank you very much. We move straight to the urgent motion. John Rediford, please. Up to 4 minutes.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, John.
Thank you very much, and thank you for conference for agreeing to hear this urgent motion. It truly is an urgent matter. So I'm pleased to be moving it. I accept Amendment 1. I do not accept Amendment 2. And if I need to use my right to reply, I will use it after Amendment 2 is taken. Please, President. I work in North Somerset, but I live in Bristol. In the last year in Bristol, we have seen, just before lockdown began last March, we saw a magnificent demonstration of 30,000 for a provincial town, as in not London. 30,000 school students walked out to march against the climate crisis behind Greta Thunberg. In June last year, we saw a crowd of 10,000 pull down the statue of a slave trader and chuck it in the docks, not before time. We have seen something like 5 or 6 demonstrations in the last 3 weeks against the police bill. These have all been absolutely magnificent demonstrations. None of them were policed by trained, sorry, not policed, wrong word, were marshalled by trained union stewards, and that is why I oppose Amendment 2. It is not necessary, it's patronising. We do need trade union involvement in the police bill campaign, the anti-police bill campaign, but not in that kind of managing, controlling format. Whether the Colston statue would have come down if it had been carefully marshalled is a very important question. So all of these demonstrations that I've just referred to could have been made illegal were this bill to become law. Priti Patel has labelled Extinction Rebellion as criminals who disrupt our free society. She described the Black Lives Matter movement last summer as dreadful, and therefore has introduced a bill which will make it an offence to intentionally or recklessly cause public nuisance, will make it an offence to cause harm through annoyance or inconvenience. It also gives the police power to control protest deemed by bystanders to be too noisy. Controlled areas around Parliament will ban protests to prevent disruption to MPs. These are just some of the measures in the 307-page document. This is going to make a massive impact on our right to protest. And actually, defence of statues is written into the bill there, excuse me, in terms of a punishment for attacking inanimate objects, which could be as much as 10 years. North Somerset NEU, along with Bristol and Bath NEU, are proud to be supporting the Defend the Colston 4 campaign. Those people are being charged with something which would lead to a 4-year sentence, which is severe enough. If this bill became law, it would be a lot more than 4 years. So for all of these reasons, this is a horrific bill that's massively going to impact on our right to protest. Why is it being introduced now? It's being introduced now because the government know that they are going to have to bring massive austerity in the next couple of years if they wish to repay the bill that's come up during the pandemic. They do not need to. According to the International Labour Organization, the decrease in earnings of the world's workers in 2020 was 2.67 trillion. According to Oxfam, the increase in wealth of the world's billionaires in 2020 was 2.82 trillion. There is plenty of money there to pay for this pandemic, and we need to fight to make sure that that is where the bill comes from. finally, it is really important there's trade union involvement in this bill. That is why I brought the motion to conference today. The fantastic protests we've seen need more trade union content. Specifically, what we are going to argue for in Bristol is to look at the May Day celebrations, which are now legal after March the 29th, to have an explicit anti-police bill content. President Conference, please support this urgent motion. I move.
Thank you very much, John. And we're going to move straight to Nadia Thornton to second, after which I'll be calling Richard Reeser and Colleen Johnson to propose and second the amendment to this urgent motion. So Nadia, good afternoon, good to see you, and you have up to 3 minutes.
Okay, Conference Chair, Nadia Thornton, Bristol, a constant talker but first-time speaker at an NEU conference. The people who know me on this Zoom call will find this particular motion an unusual one for me to second. The most common protesting in my life is the Year 9 student who's not even doing anything. And my idea of serious annoyance is a class of Year 7s first thing on a Monday morning. Yet it seems, especially in Bristol, hard to ignore the public reaction to the latest police, crime, sentencing and courts bill. And as educators, it's important for us to reflect why. As I read through the bill, the first part that stood out to me stated during summer 2020, there was widespread upset about the damage and desecration of memorials. While I do not doubt there was upset, to me that wasn't the main outcome from that summer. What I think of instead is a secondary school who rebranded after 129 years of being named after a slave trader. I'm sure the Black students and families at that school are not feeling widespread upset. As a maths teacher, I could debate correlation versus causation until the end of the conference, but there's no denying whatever your opinions of last summer, the impact has been important and immense. Only a week ago, hundreds of students at Pimlico Academy staged a sit-in protest outside the school to combat rules which discriminated against their Black and Muslim peers. If this bill were to become law and the protest was designated a serious disruption, it could have been declared illegal. These students staged a great protest, one that was within the aims and objectives and motions passed at this very conference. Dare I say a protest that represents some of the core aims and values of our union. Even in my own classroom last week, I heard two 14-year-old boys talking about the effect the stop and search changes could have on their futures. As educators, we're held to official standards. Within those standards, it says, and I quote, to promote the basic British values of democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty. Last time I checked, individual liberty included the right to come together with others to peacefully express our views, marches and protests. Now, despite what the tabloid headlines say, we as a profession are not hypocrites. That's why it's not an option to be on the fence. I urge you, not just as trade unionists, but as educators, to support this motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Nadia. And we pass straight on to the amendment. Richard Reeser is to be called with up to 4 minutes to speak, proposing Amendment 1. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, President. Conference. From the Disabled Members Conference, we think it's important that this is strengthened, this urgency motion. It's very important to understand, first of all, that we add that this is actually the police bill that we as a union believe that this is in breach of, first of all, the UN Declaration on Human Rights, which safeguarded the right to peaceful protest and association. We've already had the right to association much reduced by the Conservative government for the last 30 years in terms of what we can and can't do. Now we are also having our right to peaceful protest. It is also in the Human Rights Act, which is British legislation, Article 11, and believe it or not, it is also in the European Convention on Human Rights, which has nothing to do with the European Union, which was set up by Britain largely after the war with 49 countries in Europe and a binding court, the European Court of Human Rights. During the Brexit debates, this was often confused by the Brexiteers with the much smaller court, which dealt with agreements within the 27. Now, this is a wide human rights thing and can be enforced by appeal to that by any British citizen. However, we shouldn't actually be passing bad law such as this. It is, as Mary said, it is the power in the union that has to be used to protect those who don't have as much power as we do. And I would particularly draw your attention to disabled people and their struggle for rights. It was indeed 121 years ago this week that 250 blind trade unionists were marching from Cardiff Manchester and Leeds to London for their basic rights, not to be treated as charity cases in local authority and charity workshops, but to have justice, not rights. Eventually, they got the first legislation through in 1920, first disability legislation through on the statute book anywhere in the world. It didn't give them all they wanted, but it did give them a proper pension and retirement at 50. That was collective action. Roll on to 1995, we'd had 16 attempts by the disability movement, by parliamentarians and others to get disability discrimination legislation on the statute book. Over and over again, it had been filibustered and talked out by the Conservatives. Some of the Conservatives supported it, Ian Duncan Smith, for instance, but there were still massive oppositions. In the end, it was direct action, the sort of direct action that will be outside the law, that actually changed this. And in every case where we more recently had disabled people against the cuts protesting against the large numbers of people have died from austerity measures, to say nothing of what has happened during COVID, where we've been 2/3 of the people who've died. Before that, there were 1,600 people dying over a 5-year period because of the benefit cuts. Surely we have a right to protest about this. It would stop the sort of protesting. The whole point of a protest is to upset other people, to actually make an impression. It's not to be silently kettled away somewhere that nobody sees you. It is actually to be a nuisance, to be annoying, to actually make an impact on society. That is the point of protest. Therefore, what the government is proposing is no protest, because they can manage it in such a way that it will have no impact whatsoever. Therefore, I urge you to support this and strengthen this urgency motion, and make sure that we use our strength to support disabled people's struggles in the now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And we pass to Colleen, is due to second the motion with up to 3 minutes to speak. Good afternoon, Colleen. Good to see you.
Absolutely everyone should have the right to protest, to meet together and let their opinions be known. It is a fundamental right. People working together to protest via direct action has created a consensus for change on many, many occasions, be it the Montgomery bus protest, the Stonewall uprising, or the suffragettes creating the Women's Social and Political Union. Disabled people are no different. They have their history of protest. After years of being disregarded, or worse still, vilified by the tabloid press, protest became a powerful tool in their armoury. It was hard to ignore disabled people chaining themselves to buses or bus station entrances, demanding accessible transport. Protesting loudly and not conforming to society's idea of fragile disabled people, as wheelchairs were tipped over when folks refused to budge. This was how disabled people protested in Birmingham to get the self-lowering, kneeling buses that exist today. Yet lots of railway stations still remain inaccessible to many, and booking support to travel can be a nightmare. Coming more up to date, disabled people's rights groups have regularly protested against the policy of austerity, an ideological choice which has scapegoated disabled people, using conditionality and sanctions to limit in-work benefits and universal credit. So to sum up, conference, the right to protest is a crucial element in an open and free society, especially for disabled people who have fought back to escape the limited expectations of government and broader society. Please support this important amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colleen, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to hear the whole of your contribution in seconding Amendment 1. I'm just going to check my list of speakers. There are no speakers against Amendment 1. We've got a couple of speakers for, Paul Phillips and Simon Murch, but we have Standing Order 20 invoked. So, conference, your chance to indicate whether you would wish to proceed to the vote on Amendment 1 by voting for, or hear further speakers before you do so by voting against. A number of delegates have been kind enough to let me know that they found some of the explanations from the chair very helpful, particularly for new delegates. I think what, conference, you don't realise is that most of the time I'm just explaining it to myself. Time is up. 712 of you, 90% wishing to proceed to the vote, 79 against and 4 abstentions. So we're going to proceed to the vote as soon as that is possible on Amendment 1. We're just waiting for that to be loaded in. There we go. The Amendment 1 to the urgent motion is now up for voting. Just waiting for the time to count down. I've kept well away from those musical references after the first one. We are just waiting for the results of that urgent motion vote. On the amendment, Amendment 1, overwhelmingly carried, 763 in favour, 25 against, 36 abstentions. Standing Order 21 was invoked. So conference, this is where you have a choice of where we're going next. I'm going to ask you to vote on Standing Order 21. If you vote in favour of it, we will revert to the main motion as amended, the urgent motion as amended. If you vote against, we will continue on to Amendment 2. And the time window for that vote is just coming to a close. Thank you very much indeed. So that indicates your support to revert to the main motion as amended. Just going back to the main motion, this is the motion in which we had the largest number of speakers' cards submitted. I have a very long list of names, starting with Amy Fletcher and Keith Smith and Neve Sweeney, Paul Power, Natasha Sorrell. I could go on for some considerable length of time, but every single one of those had indicated their intention to speak for the motion. We do have a standing order invoked. Because I don't need to take a speaker against. I can hear the views of conference on standing orders. So we're going to put that to you. If you vote in favour, we will go straight to the vote on the amended motion. There will be no right of reply. No one has spoken against. If you vote against, then we will hear a number of the speakers who I've just mentioned by name. And conference, you have voted 730 to 92 to proceed to the vote. So we're now going to go directly to the vote. I've already indicated no right of reply. We're going straight to the vote on the second urgent motion as amended by the first amendment. And conference, that vote will load in very shortly. And after we have completed this vote, we are reverting to the continuation of the business from bargaining and negotiations. So we're starting on motion 12. So I'm going to be looking for James Sturton of Oldham, David Mingay of Luton, and I'll just see if motion 12 has any amendments. It doesn't. So it will be just those two to start with. I'm making sure I don't miss the opportunity to vote myself. And motion 12, just to let conference know, has no speakers against. There's just one speaker registered to speak for. So I'll be calling James Sturton and David Mingay, and then conference, depending upon your decision, we will call Amy Murch of Sheffield. And urgent motion 2 carried 803 to 15, 96% in favour, 2% against and 2% abstaining. Thank you very much, conference. We move to motion 12. Conference, you will remember that we completed motions 10 and 11 in the previous bargaining and negotiations section. So we're picking up at the point that we last finished. In a section of conference designated to continue this section. Motion 12, James Sturton is available. James, good afternoon to you. Good to see you, and you have up to 4 minutes. Thank you.
Afternoon, President, conference. In 2018, when the government released their Ways to Reduce Workload in Schools document, I did think maybe naively that workload would improve within education. But as stated in this motion, the 2019 Teacher Workload Survey points out this was no magic wand, and further action must now follow. It is no surprise to yet again read that your average teacher works over the 48-hour working time regulations, that workload is unmanageable, and that the contents of the workload reduction document has largely fallen on deaf ears, especially since COVID. Much of the right-wing press has led society to believe educational professionals across the country have been sat twiddling their thumbs since the start of the pandemic, repeating the false message that schools were shut. If only they'd actually gone into an educational setting to observe what was happening or talk to a member of staff while they worked remotely, supporting students both academically and emotionally. Maybe this misinformation may have stopped. It was clear to see that as we again returned for another full reopening, I, like many of you, will have seen the effects of this prolonged demand on both staff and students. With exams cancelled, many secondary and A-level teachers, like myself, have now become free examiners. We are given the task of making sure we plan, mark and QA the entire process for allocating a grade with no real thought as to how this will increase an already burdensome workload or the effects this will be having on students. As well as teaching staff, the UCL Institute for Education published only last week research based on analysis of more than 9,000 TAs that 88% supported vulnerable and key worker children in schools during lockdown, with 51% managing a whole class bubble on their own. Without this, schools would certainly have shut completely. Many of these staff having carried these extra responsibilities without any additional training. And now what do we see as schools strain to balance their budgets? We see schools having to go through managing change and TAs being the first vital roles that are removed. Some thanks that is. And where does this workload go? To the remaining staff who are already overworked. We also need to be aware of the huge implications this will have had on trainees and NQTs. They'll have had no real opportunity to teach in any sort of normal fashion. The DFE figures already highlighting within the motion from 2019 that a third of NQTs leave the profession within 5 years. And no doubt after this crisis, when education staff have been treated so poorly by the government and the press, it doesn't take Mystic Meg to see the implications on future teaching numbers. We need to bring workload to the fore of government's attention. We need to make the public aware of the workload issues education staff face now and moving forward post-COVID. One of these would certainly be looking at the mental health impacts of workload on staff. Without taking care of this would be catastrophic in the long term on current and future members. We've seen workload charters in a number of districts prior to the pandemic and they need to be revisited. One thing we're looking to rekindle in Oldham, working closely with local councillors and school reps. This would allow for employers who do not take workload issues seriously to be faced head on and give members the strength to speak up and take action if needed. If I ever hear the words in a meeting again, it's about working smarter, not harder, that individual will be getting kicked quite happily by myself out of whatever virtual meeting we're in, faster than a Jackie Weaver councillors meeting. I move this motion.
Thank you very much indeed, James. And we move from James's proposal of motion 12 to David Mingay from Luton, who will be seconding it. Good to see you, David. Good afternoon. You have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, President. Good afternoon, Conference. I'm not going to take up a lot of time. There are a lot more motions to get through, and we're very short on time, and it's nearly the final countdown for Eastern Region delegates who know what that means. I really want to just draw attention to point A and point B, particularly where it talks about significant reductions for workload in teachers and support staff. Increasingly, the workload is falling not just on teachers, but on support staff. Our support staff are on pretty much poverty wages who come at 9 o'clock and go at 3:15. Increasingly, support staff are being given demands of online training in place of normal training with no additional time to do it. Increasingly, it's becoming expected that TAs come in early to get work done. It's not fair on us as teachers, it's not fair on support staff, it's not fair on anyone. And when it talks about point B, we need to stop talking to ourselves about workload, Conference. We need to be telling everyone. We need to continually challenge that narrative that really grates when they say, oh, you only work 9 till 3. You only work like how 39 weeks of the year. President, Conference, we all know that we're sitting here at a virtual conference. At the back of our mind, we've got plans to do, we've probably got books to mark, we've got assessments, we've got reports to write, we've got a mountain of workload to do, and we know, and I know TAs in my school have got similar workload pressures. Support the motion, which I know you will, and let's move on to bigger and better things in Conference.
Thank you very much, David. And we have, as I've previously indicated, no speakers against on this motion. Standing Order 19 has been invoked. So, conference, you are fully familiar with the process. If you vote yes when this procedural motion is put to you, we will go straight to the vote on motion 12. Straightforward as that, because there are no speakers against, no right of reply. If you vote against Standing Order 19, then we've got the opportunity to hear from Amy Murch in Sheffield, who's the only speaker who's notified their wish to speak on this issue. We may get the chance to hear from Amy, but if not, conference, depending upon your decision, we'll be moving to motion 13. Standing Order 19 has been carried 7-8 to 33, 4 abstentions. So, conference, we move to vote on motion 12. There are no amendments. It's motion 12 as printed in your agenda. And once we've done that, we're going to be calling Graham Copsey of Liverpool to propose the supply staff motion 13, Oliver Kingsley of Liverpool to second that motion. And we've got an amendment, just checking how many. We've just got one amendment to motion 13. I haven't taken the opportunity to say, but many of you will know I am not only here as president, but also very proud to be a district delegate for Southend, casting votes alongside the other 5 delegates from Southend who are with us throughout conference. And the results of that motion are in. 753 votes in favour, 2 against, 1 abstention. That's a more than 99% vote in favour, conference, of motion 12, overwhelmingly carried. And we progress then to motion 13. I'm looking for Graham Copsey to come to the screen. Good afternoon, Graham. And you have up to 4 minutes. Thank you very much.
Right, okay, we're moving this motion on behalf of Liverpool and try to be quick because I think we need to get back to vote motion 22. I thought it was a disgrace the way that it was shut down with 3 minutes to go before lunch when we could easily have taken the vote for that. So I want to get on to that, please. Supply teachers are vital to the smooth running of our schools and our education system. Yet despite this, across the country, supply teachers are being exploited by private supply agencies who profit massively from their work. Supply teachers are underpaid, excluded from the TPS and other pension schemes, and deprived of CPD. When I worked as a supply teacher, I was earning £110 to £125 a day. My salary scale at the time was £200 a day. I was being massively underpaid, whilst I went on long-term supply, being expected to do the full job of a teacher, mark, etc., when I should be paid properly for that. All the time, my supply agency was creaming off massive profits from my work. They're exploiting me, and that exploitation has to stop. So what we need is a return to local authority supply pools, not for-profit, to supply schools with high quality supply teachers while paying them properly and paying into the TPS. This is done in some local authorities still. Talk to the woman from Kirklees that's still doing it there. It needs extending though. This benefits schools and everybody. The teachers get paid properly, the schools get good quality supply teachers in, and the teachers get paid properly and get their pensions paid. A significant number of our members are supply teachers. We need to be, as a union, to support them and campaign for them to be paid properly and to be valued for the work that they do. I move this motion and also support the amendment 13.1, which strengthens the motion. So please move and please vote for the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Graham. And we pass from Graham to Oliver Kingsley, also representing Liverpool District. Oliver has up to 3 minutes. Good afternoon, Oliver. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Up to 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, Conference. I formally second the motion for supply staff. I also agree with my colleague Graham about the treatment of motion 22, which I'm keen to get back to. I'll make a couple of points. Our wonderful Prime Minister continually talks about let's build back better.
Oliver, hello. I'm interrupting you only because you said you were formally seconding and then you have carried on speaking. You are either giving a speech or you are formally seconding, and your speech needs to relate to the motion as printed, not your views on any other subject. Are you intending simply to formally second or give a speech? We will restart your 3 minutes.
I will give a brief speech, if that's okay.
Absolutely. You have your 3 minutes to second the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Conference. If you go onto the internet and type in Northern Ireland Substitute Teacher Register, you will find there an organisation organised by the Northern Ireland Government, which organises supply teachers right through Northern Ireland. I think the motion basically is asking that to be replicated throughout the UK, and I would ask you to support motion 13 and also support motion 13 amendment 13.1. I formally second.
Thank you very much indeed, Oliver, and appreciate your words in support of the motion. And we pass to Amendment 13.1. The proposer is Paul Busby from North Yorkshire. It's going to be seconded by Melanie Griffiths of Kirklees. I'm just checking my speakers list for Amendment 13.1. There was a speaker against, which I did announce, but that speaker has withdrawn. So we have no speakers against Amendment 13.1. Paul, when you're ready, good afternoon to you, and you have up to 4 minutes.
President Conference, good afternoon. Paul Busby, District Branch Secretary, North Yorkshire, moving Amendment 13.1 and proud to be married to a supply teacher. Conference, we hold dear the core values and principles of our union, summarised on our own website as being committed to, and I quote, making the education sector a great place to work and a great place to learn, unquote. And of course, underpinning this are the principles of equality, justice and fair treatment. So, Conference, why is it that whilst we campaigned for the end of the academy system, our NEU officers sit on academy JCNCs, engaging with employers in support of our academy members? And yet, our opposition to the privatised supply sector actually prevents us from engaging with our supply members' employers. Why is that? Now is the opportunity for you to correct this anomaly and give redress to our beleaguered supply members, many of whom already, arguably, faced employment disadvantages well in excess of their NEU brothers and sisters in the maintained sector. There is a culture of the Wild West out there, a culture that has been allowed to grow unfettered by the counterbalance of an organised trade union. May I suggest that it is now time we rolled our sleeves up to defend our supply members. Supply educators are already an endangered species, starved of access to decent pay rates and teachers' pensions. They need our added protection, not less. Protection that includes full engagement with their own employers. And this brings me to Part B of the amendment. The regulations underpinning the work of supply teachers is vastly more complex and to many can be an unfamiliar landscape. We need to support our officers as best we can in this complex landscape. So I refer back to my original quote, making the education sector a great place to work and a great place to learn. I'd like our supply members to be happy to hear this and not. I'll leave it up to conference to decide. Thank you. I so move.
Thank you very much, Paul. I suspect there is applause elsewhere around the country as well. Thank you very much, Paul, proposing Amendment 13.1, and we move to Melanie Griffiths of Kirklees, who is to second with up to 3 minutes, and follow that, Melanie.
President Conference, the main motion calls on the union to support the setting up of a national supply register and local authority supply pools. In seconding the amendment, I want to show why what's being proposed in this amendment would facilitate this aim. So as Paul said, in Kirklees, we have a local authority supply pool, which was set up in response to pressure from some of the more progressive Kirklees head teachers who saw the value of being able to engage trusted local supply staff through an in-house pool, rather than through private companies creaming off profit for themselves. But over time, the Kirklees local authority pool has been used less and less by schools, as business managers, whose main consideration is cost, tend to look to cheap private agencies. If we ensure, either by recruitment or through a programme of thorough staff training, that all regional officers have at least one identifiable worker who is responsible for understanding issues related to supply members, knows what needs to be done to progress AWR claims in a timely fashion, and is responsible for making sure this happens in every case that is brought forward. This is the essence of what's being asked for in the first sentence of B. Then this will have two very positive effects. Firstly, making sure the advice line and regional officers have knowledge of and expertise in supply issues will mean that supply members will in future always be correctly advised on their rights. It'll mean that members whose agencies have not complied with AWR and been underpaid would, in every case, be supported in forcing their agency to comply with the law. This is good for the individual member who would be awarded the pay they were due. But more than this, it would mean that supply agencies and schools would no longer be able to get away with not paying teachers to scale when employed consistently by the same hirer. This would be great for our Kirklees supply pool and direct employment everywhere, as it would remove the advantage private agencies have in this deregulated market, as they would no longer always be the cheap option. I'd also like you to think about the advantages of prioritising what's asked for in the second part of B and in part C together, as these measures could also have a positive effect. We do need effective networking of supply staff. We need to encourage every branch to recruit a supply officer who can work with the supply specialist at region to find out about the paying conditions offered to staff by various agencies, organise these staff, collectivise issues, and facilitate members to push their agencies to provide better pay, stop cancelling engagements at the last moment, and force them to comply with AWR legislation. We do need to reach out to supply staff, make sure they understand and can demand their rights, make sure advice line, our branch officers and our regional officers fully understand these rights too. Please vote for the amendments and the main motion. I second.
Thank you very much indeed, Melanie. And that brings us to the end of the formal proposing and seconding of Amendment 13.1. I do have a number of speakers who wish to speak for the motion, for the amendment, but we do have a standing order activated, and my colleague is trying to find the right card to show me. It's Standing Order 20. Thank you very much. So I won't be calling a speaker immediately. Colleagues, you are about to vote on whether to proceed to the vote. But you understand that if you vote in favour, then you will have the chance to vote on Amendment 13.1 with no further speeches. If you vote against, then we'll be calling Neil Bradley from Wigan, Alex Moore from Plymouth, Patrick Markey from Northampton, and others potentially. Just waiting for the vote to come in. The result of that standing order, we've got 763 in favour, 42 against. So we are going to proceed to the vote on Amendment 13.1. We do have a speaker against the main motion. So once we have voted on Amendment 13.1, we will revert to the main motion as amended or not. And I will be calling Jeff Pye from Central Essex. And conference, you're very clearly in favour of Amendment 13.1, 735 votes in favour, 96%, 20 votes again, 11 abstentions. So we revert to the main motion as amended, and I have got a speaker against who I must take. So I'm calling Jeff Pye. There was an attempt to activate Standing Order 19, but just to be absolutely clear, if there is a speaker against, we must take at least one. Good afternoon, Jeff. Good to see you. Thank you. You have up to 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Robin. Nice to be here. Firstly, let me say I am in support of parts of this motion and the sentiment behind it. Supply teachers have been very, very poorly treated, particularly during the pandemic, many of whom have had no work whatsoever, and it has caused a massive financial hardship. I am a supply teacher myself, and I do work through an agency. So I have experience within this area. So, first of all, for the main motion, part one, there's not a single word I can disagree with. My problem arises when we get further down within it, that the register for local supply teachers, and that it's not in a regulated way. All supply teachers have got the enhanced DBS, so it is regulated in that way. But calling for conference to set up a national supply register, having a register is an irrelevance, to be honest. We are registered teachers. Local authority supply pools, it's good to hear that they work in one or two places, but in most, they wouldn't. And it's an irrelevance. Ask yourself, though, why do schools use supply agencies? It is convenient for them. They have a problem, they ring up, they can ask for a specific teacher, they may get them. And they are happy. The supply teachers only get a very small proportion of what is being given to the supply agencies. Robin will be able to tell you what the average cost is to the schools, but the schools do it because it is so convenient. What we need now, though, is not to look for old-fashioned solutions, local authorities. With the fragmentation, they're not going to work in most places. So what we need to do is look for solutions for the 21st century, the third decade of. Could it be that the NEU could set up a commercial arm where they run their own supply agency? Link it through an academy, whatever. Let's research that. Let's find a proper solution. Let's then be able to pay teachers the proper rate and, if they wish, a pension. I oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Jeff. And we have called one speaker against the main motion as amended. I'm just checking my speaker list for the main motion. And the next speaker I'd mentioned earlier, it was Becky Mann from Bromley, but we've got Standing Order 19. So conference, your opportunity to indicate whether, quite simply, you wish to move to the vote or hear what Becky has to say before we do that. There will be a right of reply, which belongs with Graham because there has been a speaker against. But first of all, conference, for you to decide under Standing Order 19 whether you wish to hear any further speakers, in which case vote against, or in vote 19 by voting for to move more swiftly to the voting. Just casting an eye forwards to motion 14, which will follow motion 13, and just early notification if speakers can begin to get themselves ready for motion 14 and the amendment 14.1. And the result of Standing Order 19 in this instance, 739 for, 80 against. So conference, you are keen to move to the vote. I do need to call the right of reply. Graham Copsey has the option of speaking for up to 3 minutes or not at all. But Graham, there have been comments in the form of a speech against. So Graham, if you would please, thank you.
Okay, just very briefly, because I do want to get on. I think the speaker against missed the point of the motion. The motion is about not replacing private supply agencies with the old-fashioned system where without the ability to call your own teachers or to have the system. The point is these local authority supply agencies would operate with the same sort of system, but not cream off profits and pay teachers properly. That's what we're calling for here. And if it works in Northern Ireland, it can work in the rest of the country. So please support the motion and vote for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Graham. We gave you 4 minutes there. It was meant to be 3, but you only used about 35 seconds. So thank you very much indeed. We are now in a position to vote on motion 13 as amended by amendment 13.1, the only amendment that was there. So you're voting for or against motion 13 as amended. And overwhelmingly carried, 841 in favour, 11 against and 7 abstentions. So conference, thank you very much for expressing your views on motion 13. And now conference, for the first time in our 3 days at conference, standing order 22 has been called. And I think it's worth providing an explanation. And the best thing I can do is reach for my standing orders and read to you exactly what is said. So standing order 22, debate in any section may be closed following the conclusion of a debate on an original motion by conference passing the motion that discussion in this section of conference be terminated. This motion will be put to conference without debate. So standing order 22 has been called. It's going to be put to you without debate. There will be no speakers. If conference approves this motion, there can be no reopening of debate on that section, and conference will normally then consider uncompleted business from an earlier section. The chair may, however, seek the approval of conference to bring forward the business of the next session. So those are the words of standing order 22. I think it is reasonable for me to give you just a little bit of explanation. What this would then mean is that motions 14 and 15 will not be heard and cannot be heard, even if we find ourselves with spare time later. Motions 14 and 15 will not be heard and cannot be heard. We do not have the option of bringing forward business of the next session because there isn't any. So the only thing that would then happen is we would revert to unfinished business and we would pick up where we left off with motion 22 and the amendments to motion 22. A conference, this is a very good example of how you decide the time that is allocated and the sequence that applies to the motions that are in front of you. I'm going to ask for standing order 22 to be put to the vote. If you vote yes, then we will not hear motions 14 or 15 and we will pass to the unfinished business that will commence with motion 22, the equalities motion. If you vote against standing order 22, then conference, we will carry on with 14 and 15. And we're just coming to the end of the time allocated for that standing order, the vote on that standing order. And it has been carried. It's a straight majority vote that is required. And it has been carried by 58% to 37%. So we move to unfinished business. Conference, I'm just going to ask for your grace just for 15 or 20 seconds while I locate in my papers where we were on motion 22. Thank you very much. I have found where I need to be in the process of the amendments. I now need to find my speakers list. Thank you for your patience, conference. So we had just had the vote on amendment 22.1 and amendment 22.1 was lost. I'm looking around the hall to make sure that people are agreeing with me. Thank you very much, Daniel. And so I am in a position where I am about to call amendment 22.2. So I am going to my speakers list for amendment 22.2. And it's a change of speaker. We've got Cecilia Astolfi of South Essex is proposing amendment 22.2. I'm pausing only because my apologies, Cecilia, good to see you, but you do need to just allow me a moment. Standing Order 21 has now been called. Standing Order 21, conference allows you to decide whether you wish to revert to the main motion. That would be a reversion to the main motion with no amendments at all. So if you vote for, you are saying that you wish to revert to the main motion. If you vote against, we will proceed to Amendment 22.2. So just waiting on the outcome of that, which will determine who I will be calling to speak next. It's been carried. So with apologies to Cecilia, one of a number of speakers have made it onto the screen and then said nothing. And my thanks to all of those speakers who've prepared speeches, and unfortunately, the opportunity has not arisen for you to offer to conference your thoughts. So we now revert to the main motion, motion 22, unamended, as printed in your programme. And I need to look at my list of speakers. I've got one speaker against motion 22, only one, so I must take that speaker. That is Stephen White of Waltham Forest. After Stephen has spoken, I will call on Melissa Hind of Kensington and Chelsea, then Yvonne Hardman. I'm calling these names so people are ready if they are called. And they both, Melissa and Yvonne, will be speaking for. So it's motion 22. Stephen White is speaking against the printed motion. Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you very much, and apologies for the long introduction to get us to this point. I don't think we've got two-way connection here. I'm sorry, conference, I'm going to decline that opportunity. I think, conference, I have been sufficiently patient to allow for that. And Stephen is, I think, clearly struggling himself as well there. There are no other speakers against motion 22. Standing Order 19 has been invoked, which means that, conference, you have the opportunity to decide whether you wish to hear any more speakers or not. Just wait for that to be loaded in. So there we go, Standing Order 19. If you vote in favour, then we will go straight to the vote. There is no right of reply. Casey used her right of reply earlier on in the process. Overwhelmingly carried, conference. You would like to move directly to vote on motion 22 as printed. You'd like to vote on motion 22 as printed. And I will just be taking some advice on where we're heading next. I think it's motion 17. Thank you very much. So we're just waiting for motion 22 to load in. Thank you, Mike. So it's for or against or abstain on motion 22. 10 seconds. And we will be moving on to motion 17 and specifically amendment 17.1. Amendment 17.1 had already been proposed by Debs Gwynn. That was the point at which we ran out of time, and I was about to call Karen Townsend. So motion 22, overwhelmingly carried, 694 votes in favour, 98 against, 46 abstentions. Conference, thank you very much. And we move from that motion to motion 17, which was also unfinished business from earlier in the conference. I'm just checking with colleagues. I think I'm right in saying this is now the only motion that we can hear, because Standing Order 22 terminated the possibility of hearing 14 or 15. So we're going to motion 17. We have Amendment 1, and it's Karen Townsend. Karen is ready. Good afternoon, Karen. Not sure you ever thought you'd get to this far, but we are here, and you are seconding Amendment 17.1. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thank you, President. Conference, it is a bit unexpected, but if you cast your mind all the way back to Wednesday at the end of the day, I was just about to go. So, colleagues, I stand here at our union's annual conference, the epitome of democracy and free speech within a union and education, to second this strengthening amendment, if you can remember the proposer, but to second this amendment to the motion on ensuring discussion and debate remains truly free. I absolutely believe that we should have the right to say what we believe without fear or repercussions or attack, and to debate topics openly and freely. This amendment is designed to ensure that freedom specifically includes the right to debate, discuss, and criticise government and institutional policies, ensuring that people of all beliefs and cultures have the same rights and freedoms, whilst protecting individuals from personal attack, abuse, and actions. Figures published by the Office for Students show that of more than 300 higher education institutions in England, nearly 60,000 events and speakers were considered under the prevent duty in 2018, with more than 2,000 approved with conditions attached. Further research shows that students and staff are modifying their behaviour and disengaging from discussion and debate over fears of being labelled extremists and worrying about life-changing investigations. The government's tokenism following calls to decolonise the curriculum shows the contempt it holds towards anything non-traditional, non-white, and frankly, non-Etonian. As a society and as educators, we have a responsibility to teach all aspects of our culture and history, not just to be inclusive of all students, but to ensure that we can all learn from it, which after all is the mainstay of our job. The current push from government dictating what can and cannot be platformed, discussed, debated and taught is fundamentally fascist policy. However, it is important that in our justifiable leap to the defence of free speech, we do not fall into the BBC trap of giving every fringe opinion the same weight and respect. Nor can we ever allow hate speech, personal attacks or abuse to happen or stand unchallenged in any space. This amendment is designed to ensure that debate remains open and safe for all. Please support.
Thank you very much indeed, Karen. And we have a speaker against Amendment 17.1. In fact, we have a number of speakers against and a number speaking for. I must call at least one. So the first speaker I'm calling is Vicky Miller of Birmingham to speak against Amendment 17.1.
Good afternoon.
Vicky. Good afternoon, Vicky.
Hello. First time speaker at conference, a little bit nervous. First time, and it's been a very long time since waiting to be called, and I'd never thought we got here, so thank you. I won't take up too much time. I flip-flopped between being for this motion, against this motion so many times. I even thought I might change to speaking for it, mainly because my concern is, will each group be represented equally? Will each group that is protected under the Equality Act be allowed to name their prejudice, to name what is biased against them? Because there are certain sectors where that is not happening. Women's voices are being drowned out when we're talking about women's rights under equality law. And so my concern would be, are all our groups going to be treated equally under this motion? And what is the mechanism if there are competing rights? Where do we go with that? So it's a very difficult situation that can't be put into neat words without some further discussion and clarification. And that's why I'm against this motion, because it is too broad.
Thank you very much indeed, Vicky, and great to have another first-time speaker. Always very welcome at conference, and ordinarily you would have got a small round of applause on announcing that. We then look to see who our next speaker is on Amendment 17.1, and I'm calling a speaker in favour. That's Melissa Hind of Kensington and Chelsea. Melissa, if you're ready. After Melissa, it will be Peter Barrow speaking against. We can see you and we can hear you. Welcome, Melissa. Good to see you. And you have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, conference. Good afternoon, everybody. I don't have a huge amount to say here, except this is really a really critical amendment to come to this motion. I don't really agree with this motion much at all, but at least with this amendment, it does reclaim some of the things that worry me within the motion. And I think the biggest bit for me is that the freedom of speech includes the right to challenge and contest others' views, but it respects the right of oppressed groups to identify prejudice and discriminate. And I think that's where we just need to be really clear that that's what we want here. I think we need to be really careful about saying things are free speech when in fact they're prejudice. And I think if we don't do that, we're just allowing people to dress up fascist ideas as respectable discussion. I think as a lesbian, I'm only too aware that there are people who still think I shouldn't be teaching children. And should I have to listen to that being discussed within my union? No. Should Black members be subjected to discussions at local district meetings about whether or not there is still structural racism? Absolutely not. Would it be fair to do an event that plays into the dangerous rhetoric that only very recently was spouted by people within the Labour Party towards Gypsy, Roma and Traveller people? I know that many of you think these scenarios are hypothetical situations that won't happen, but I urge you to take off your rose-tinted glasses. You only need to read the newspapers and social media to see the overwhelming rhetoric that is presented against all sorts of minority groups. The National Education Union is a broad church, and we will have members that are racist, sexist, etc. And I, for one, do not want this motion to be passed unamended. That means conference gives an opening to bring these views into our union spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Melissa. And the next speaker on the list, I have got a standing order. We've got standing order 20. So standing order 20 is indicating the intention to move to the vote on this amendment. I believe I'm right in saying that the original proposer of the amendment, of the motion, was supportive of this amendment. So, conference, if you say yes, we will hear no further speakers. There will be no right of reply at this stage, and we will continue to the vote. If you vote against, conference, then we will hear some more speakers on the amendment. And the results of that are in 634 in favour, 98 against, 4 abstentions. So amendment 17.1 goes straight to the vote, please. Just as that's loaded in, some of you may be wondering when you might next see us all on screen in another Zoom meeting. Well, the NEU has got a Zoom meeting prepared for April the 19th at 5 o'clock. It's a special national Zoom for reps and officers, and it's focusing particularly on issues around campaigning in the workplace on directed time. One of the very first things I did nearly 30 years ago as a young rep was organise a directed time spreadsheet for all the teachers in the school where I worked, which led very rapidly to management changing their ways of operating and the patterns of meetings and parents' evenings. And I still use exactly the same spreadsheet in leading my own school 30 years on. So thank you, conference. That is motion amendment 17.1. 648 votes in favour, 68 against, and 48 abstentions. Conference, the next item of business would ordinarily be amendment 17.2, but standing order 21 has been called. So standing order 21 is where you get to choose whether you go on to amendment 17.2 or go back to the main motion. And if you vote for, we will revert to the main motion. I'm just checking. I do have speakers against the main motion. Or we go on to 17.2, where I also have speakers for and against. So if you vote for, it's back to the main motion. If you vote against, then we will go to 17.2. So just a second plug for that directed time Zoom. That is on the 19th at 5 o'clock. I'm sure we'll have the opportunity of sending out communications so that you can all find the link for that. That conference vote is 595 in favour, 177 against. So we are reverting to the main motion. So 17.2 will not be heard. So we're going back to the main motion as amended by 17.1. And I must then call the first speaker against. And the first speaker against motion 17 is Melissa Hind from Kensington and Chelsea. So if we can call Melissa up, she's on the screen already. My goodness, you're moving faster than I am. You have up to 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Conference. Sorry, I was a bit informal earlier. I'm Melissa Hind from Kensington and Chelsea. I think most of you heard my reservations when I was speaking for 17.1. And what I just wanted to add in about that is that actually, I don't think 17.1 does enough to protect people with protected characteristics. I am still really worried about the scenarios I presented earlier, where people are going to use this notion that there is free speech in order to debate people's human rights. And I think, you know, there is pushback against Black Lives Matters. There is pushback against, you know, inclusive RSE. We're seeing some people wanting like a reintroduction of Section 28. And so I think really we just need to not vote through this motion at all. And that's all I really have to say about this. Thank you, Conference, and thank you for your time. Take care.
Thank you very much indeed, Melissa. And we have got Standing Order 19 called. I've taken one speaker against. So if Conference, you now have the opportunity to vote on Standing Order 19. If you vote in favour, then we will have the right of reply, and then we will move to the vote on motion 17 as amended. If you vote against, I will take further speakers. So we're just waiting for Standing Order 19 to complete. Conference, you voted in favour, so we are now reverting to the right of reply. So if we can call Joe Flynn up onto the screen. Joe is ready for us.
Thank you, President. I'll be much briefer than that. Thanks to the people who spoke in this debate. I realise it's been fractured across a couple of days, but I think it's a really significant one, which links well to the debate we had on the police bill earlier as well. I mean, I appreciate what Melissa said there about her reservations and some of the kind of toxicity that and bigotry that we have in society at the moment in the media and things that will leak into our union as well, no doubt, among a minority of members. And I did mention that in moving the motion. I think the fundamental principle that the motion's trying to get to is the idea that democracy is fundamentally democracy and free speech is kind of the oxygen of the labour movement. So without the freedom to discuss and debate, democracy even within our union would be stifled. We believe there's plenty of good practice within the union on dealing with strongly held views when people have unusual and sometimes difficult views, and dealing with that in a constructive way and a respectful way. The motion asks for that good practice to be collated and spread. So I believe it would help with the managing of difficult issues and different views within the union. So please vote for the motion. It also contains many things in terms of citizenship education and the other things that we spoke about, which I think it'd be a shame to lose. So please do vote for this motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Joe. So we come to what will be the final vote of the conference. You are about to vote on motion 17 as amended, and we are doing so with 2 minutes of debating time remaining. Just had a message in from Henry Fowler. I was advertising the 5 o'clock Zoom on 19th of April for officers and reps on directed time and bargaining in the workplace on that issue. On the 21st of April, 2 days later, on the same theme, there is a national Zoom for all members. So hopefully we'll be able to encourage mass participation in that issue. Particularly, please, delegates, get in touch with new reps in schools in your area and encourage them to attend on the 19th and involve their fellow members on the 21st. Votes are going to be collated. And the week after that, on the 28th of April, we've got a national Zoom at 5:30 on a health and safety theme, marking International Workers' Memorial Day. So plenty to be involved in. And the result of that motion is now in motion 17. overwhelmingly carried, 617 votes to 165. Conference, we reach 3:15 on Friday. We have completed all the business that was possible to conduct in the time that was available. You conference have steered it throughout. I thank you for staying online throughout the 3 days, for participating, for voting, for being ready to speak, and particular thanks to those of you who did manage to speak and contribute. The entire event would not have been possible without a huge amount of effort, coordination, and commitment from a vast number of people, many of whom are here in Hamilton House, but many others spread all across the country. I'm not going to name anyone. I'm simply going to thank all of you and all of them for what has been a superb 3 days. Enjoy your afternoon, enjoy the weekend, and we will see each other again. Thank you very much indeed.